If you haven't burnt out yet, if you haven't become disillusioned with the hope and belonging salesman, if you still believe in existing movements and institutions, then this just might not be for you. However, the hope is that any earnest learner will find something of value here. What you're about to hear is a transmission that is not supposed to be heard, a message that is not supposed to be possible. Nobody is supposed to know this kind of information. What you are to do with it, I don't know. I don't even know what to do with it. It's not just the book that I'll be reading from today. It's not just the next book that I'll be reading from in this playlist. It is the way that they are brought together under this common theme. It is a theme of coming to terms with the failures of the 20th century. But also, through this kind of reconciliation, my hope is that some sort of new possibilities will present themselves. Something that is not just this race, class, and sex or gender activism, division, or the simulation of the continuance of movements that long ago fizzled out and were appropriated into being little more than the shock troops of HR's litigation culture agenda that seeks to establish increasing control over the lives, minds, and possibilities of humans who've been reduced to nothing more than labor power, consumers, and niche identarian belonging. This is our situation. Is there a way out? I don't know. All right. Let's get this thing going. All right, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is part 2. Part 1 happened the other day. Does that mean that you should stop listening to what you're listening to right now and then go try to track down part 1 and then start listening to that to try to decide if you should actually listen to part 2? This is one of those perpetual questions forced on us by anything that is happening in a series, to which I say no. So long as this is live, just hang out, make yourself right at home. Go ahead and cue this up, listen to it in the background while you're doing other things, and welcome to the live stream. If you're listening to this on podcast or on YouTube in the future, don't even worry about it. Yeah, for sure. You can always go back to the beginning if you'd like to. But also, all learning, comprehension, language, logic, and sense-making is retroversive, which is a word coined by Molly Ann Rothenberg in this book, The Excessive Subject, A New Theory of Social Change. It's a good book. Retroversion is ultimately what every social theorist who's got anything interesting to say in the last 100 years has been working with or kind of assuming. She coins the term, but it is ultimately something that people get at whether they use the word or not. It's the way that meaning is retroactive. Retroactivity. The way that adding something changes the meaning of everything that's gone up to that point, right? Well, what does this have to do with whether or not to go back to the beginning when you're in a series? Well, for our purposes here, what it means is your brain is always just going to be filling in the blanks later. That's what I mean when I say, like, Oh, you've got a question about something, put a question mark over it and keep going. You don't have to derail yourself and go track down every little thing that derails you, or you'll just constantly be thrown off course. Instead, by putting a question mark over something, you free yourself to keep going. And that thing that you put the question mark over, it's like a bookmark for later. And I call that like an algebraic placeholder, right? An algebraic placeholder. You'll fill it in later. That's all that really means. This is part of deschooling your mind. There is no exam, okay? See what sticks. See what kinds of questions come up. But with that, we're about to get to it. This is chapter 2 of Surveillance Valley by Yasha Levine, and this is the chapter that I'm very excited to get into. It is called Command, Control, and Counterinsurgency. I was going to read this yesterday on the channel, but Anne, my wonderful wife, was not quite caught up yet. And so I decided, you know what? I'm going to wait until she's caught up. And so when she was at work yesterday, she did get caught up. And now we're here. And she'll be listening from Amazon today, in fact. I'm going to go ahead and start a poll in the chat. Did you already hit the like button? The answers are yes, no. Actually, I'm going to change it from no to, oh, I'll do it right now. And then the other one will be no, never, hate you, because that's the obvious options. 4 people had already liked this. 7 people are in the chat right now. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. Look, when I did this on the 4th of July, it was a huge success. For some reason, a video that I did not imagine would see more than 300 pairs of eyeballs has already seen over 1,000. It's really exciting to think that that many people are interested in this topic. How many of them are serious? How many of them are genuinely questioning their current situation? How many of them are really wondering why it was that the left lost the 20th century? How many of them are willing to seriously tarry with that loss and come to terms with it? And through that reconciliation, hopefully find some kind of a new possibility. I don't know. I don't even know. I don't even know what to do. But we're not going to be able to even have that conversation for a while now, because there's a whole litany of texts that come in under this theme, under the general header of this question, that until we've thought through them and with one another for a while, I mean, we're not going to really even be able to come to some kind of a unique, new, important, insightful kind of position on the situation. In the last chapter, Yasha Levine talked about the origins of ARPA, which became DARPA, which was the pre-runner to the CIA. The point of all of this is that the history of the internet that we usually hear is some mixture of, oh yeah, so that comes from the state trying to make its communication apparatus nuclear proof in case of Soviet, warheads, versus like a bunch of acid dripping hippies trying to do radical networking kinds of communication and creation in this web thing, right, that they invented. The point is that both of those are wrong. The internet is hardwired to be a counterinsurgency machine, not just surveillance. It's not just surveillance. The title of Yasha Levine's book, Surveillance Valley, gets us off on the wrong foot in some sense. It's not just about that. It's about counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency, what we know, has no limits for the United States. Like, there are no limits to what it will or will not do. I mean, it'll do anything, right? The examples are like using anthropologists and sociologists and psychologists to figure out the way that people operate in a village or a town, figure out their biggest fears and their weaknesses or superstitions and then playing off of those, even to the extent that that means like killing people and hanging them upside down and draining their blood so that it looks like vampires killed them. Like the CIA was on record for having done stuff like this in all kinds of third world countries. And so that should be an indication that there's really no limitation of what the United States is willing to do when it comes to winning this war against communism, which it did win, right? And there's a bunch of people online right now whose entire career is built around trying to tell you that the fight goes on and nothing's ever really changed. But yeah, I mean, there will always be people who, after a war, hide out in the jungle and keep fighting like the war never ended, right? There will always be those people. And sometimes they build up a nice little gang around themselves. And other times they start a YouTube channel or a podcast. Michael Portman says, God damn it, the did you like poll does work. Yeah, it does work because then people actually click the like button. They don't do it otherwise. They don't do it. Great to have you. We'll get to it. Command, control, and counterinsurgency. This is the chapter where the rubber hits the road. So you don't need the rest of it. That's a nice, go back to it later, see if it matters. All right, let's go. The quote that this starts with is by Christopher Pyle in what's called The Army Surveillance of Civilians, a Documentary Analysis, 1973. What separates military intelligence in the United States from its counterparts in totalitarian states is not its capabilities, but its intentions. This is a significant distinction, but one which may not wholly reassure many Americans. So, I mean, whoever Christopher Pyle is, assuming he's like a military guy or something like that, he's just saying like, look, it's not about like what we do and what we're capable of. No. It's we have the right intentions. The enemy, they don't have the right intentions. We'll both do evil, but we have the right intentions, right? It's this lesser evilist logic always seemingly operative in the military and political worlds. Early Monday morning, October 1st, 1962, a man named J.C.R. Licklider woke up in an apartment along the Potomac River across from the White House. He ate breakfast, said goodbye to his wife and daughters, and drove the short way to the Pentagon to start his new job as director of ARPA's Behavioral Science and Command and Control Research Divisions. Settling into his modest office, he surveyed the scene. For the past few years, those in defense circles had pushed to upgrade America's military and intelligence communication systems. As soon as he came into the office, President Kennedy had complained about the difficulty of effectively exercising command of U.S. military forces. He found himself blind and deaf at the most crucial moments, unable to get real-time intelligence updates or to communicate timely commands to commanders in the field. Believing that military commanders were using the outdated technology as cover to buck his authority and ignore instructions, he pushed Defense Secretary Robert McNamara to investigate solutions. He also harangued Congress about the need to develop a truly unified, nationwide, indestructible system to ensure high-level command, communication, and control. Licklider agreed. America's defense communication systems were indeed pathetically outdated. They simply could not effectively respond to the challenges of the day. Dozens of small-scale wars and insurgencies happening in distant places no one knew a damn thing about. All that combined with the ever-present threat of nuclear strikes that could decapitate huge chunks of military command. But what exactly could such a new system look like? What components would it have? What new technologies needed to be invented for it to work? Few people in the Pentagon knew the answers. Licklider was one of the few. Joseph Carl Robert Licklider, a ridiculously long name, was simply called Lick. He wore Coke bottle glasses and three-piece suits and was known for his Coca-Cola addiction. In rarefied military circles, Lick had a reputation as a brilliant psychologist and a computer futurist with some far-out ideas about the coming age of the man-machine. He was born in 1915 in St. Louis, Missouri. His father, a Baptist minister and the head of the St. Louis Chamber of Commerce, was a God-fearing, business-oriented man. Lick made his dad proud. In 1937, he graduated from Washington University in St. Louis with a triple major in psychology, mathematics, and physics, and then moved on to study how animals process sound, which mostly involves slicing cats' skulls open and zapping their brains with electricity. My favorite kind of person. During World War II, Lick was recruited to work at Harvard's Psychoacoustic Laboratory, which was established with lavish funding from the U.S. Air Force to study human speech, hearing, and communication. At this lab, he met his future wife. This is Louise Thomas. I'm pretty sure that would be Louise before it was Louis, but this is Louise. Louise Thomas, his wife, who worked as a secretary in a military research center. She considered herself a socialist and even brought her copy of Socialist Worker to the office. She'd leave it on the edge of her desk so that the men in the lab could grab it on the way to the bathroom and have something to read while they were on the can. Damn, that's edgy. After the war, Lick left Harvard for the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. MIT, baby. There, he came into contact with the world's first networked digital computer surveillance system. It changed the trajectory of his life. Soviet nukes. Hey, Sean's back. Sean was here last time. What's up, Sean? McNamara. Thank you. Yeah, McNamara. Whoa, there's already 16 people here, 14 likes. Nice, nice, nice. Good to have you all. Remember, if you got to step away, just leave it playing in the background. You can always scrub back and then play forward. That's one of the wonderful things about doing this on YouTube as opposed to Twitch. I care about you being able to go back and then play forward faster. Twitch doesn't. Really quick, I'm going to shoot, unless they changed how they do things, but yeah. Going to go ahead and get this. Got to send a text message. Okay, let's get back to it. Soviet nukes. At precisely 7 a.m. on August 29th, 1949, engineers sitting in a fortified bunker on the isolated steppes of the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic threw a switch and detonated the first Soviet nuclear bomb. First Lightning, code name RDS-1. The bomb was set up on a wooden tower surrounded by mock buildings and industrial and military machinery, trucked there to test the effects of the blast. A T-34 tank, brick buildings, a metal bridge, a small section of a railroad complete with railroad cars, automobiles, trucks, field artillery, an airplane, and over 1,000 different live animals, dogs, rats, pigs, sheep, guinea pigs, and rabbits, tied down in trenches, behind walls, and inside vehicles. Damn. It's like Yahweh doing the flood. It was a fairly small bomb around the size, except that was everybody. It was a fairly small bomb around the size of the one dropped on Nagasaki. In fact, it was almost a one-to-one replica of Fat Man, as that bomb was known. Before and after photos of the site show heavy damage. Before and after photos of the site show heavy damage? That's kind of weird. Why do the before photos show heavy damage? Wouldn't it just be the after photos? Many of the animals died instantly. Those that didn't were badly burned and died of radiation exposure. Lavrentibaria, the notorious NKVD, People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, a Soviet secret police organization, chief, was there to observe. He cabled Stalin. The test was a success. News of the explosion threw America's military establishment into a panicked frenzy. U.S. nuclear dominance was no more. The Soviet Union now had the capability to launch a nuclear strike against the United States. All it needed was a long-range bomber. This posed a serious problem. America's early warning radar system was sparse and full of holes. The process of tracking airplanes was done by hand, uniformed military men sitting in dark rooms filled with cigarette smoke, watching primitive green radar screens, barking out coordinates and jotting them down on glass boards, and then radioing commands to pilots. The system would be useless in the face of a large targeted nuclear attack by air. A report of a special body convened by the U.S. Air Force recommended that the early warning radar system be automated. Radar information should be digitized, sent over wires, and processed in real time by computers. In 1950, this recommendation was more than just ambitious, it was a crackpot idea. MIT professor George Valley, who headed the Air Force study, asked several computer companies if they would be able to build such a real-time computer system. He was laughed out of the room. The technology for real-time data processing, especially for multiple radar installations that were hundreds of miles away from the central computer, just did not exist. Nothing even came close. If the Air Force wanted an automated radar system, it would have to invent a computer powerful enough to handle the job. Luckily, the Pentagon was already a prime mover and shaker in this field. During World War II, the U.S. military played a leading role in advancing the primitive state of digital computer technology. The reasons for this were many, and all of them central to the war effort. One was cryptography. The Navy's intelligence division, as well as several other predecessor agencies to the National Security Agency, NSA, had long used specialized IBM punch card tabulators to perform cryptographic analysis and code breaking. During the war, they were faced with advanced Nazi encryption techniques and needed machines that could work faster and with much more complicated code. Digital computers were the only thing that could get the job done. Other services were also desperate for machines that could carry out mathematical calculations at high speeds, but for a slightly different reason. During the war, powerful new cannons and field artillery rolled off production lines and headed out of the European and Pacific theaters. All this firepower was useless if it couldn't be properly aimed. Artillery, big guns that can hit targets a dozen miles away, don't shoot in a straight trajectory, but lob shells at a slight angle so that they descend on far-off targets after tracing a parabolic arc. Each gun has a firing table that specifies the angle at which to fire so shells hit their mark. Firing tables aren't simple, one-page sheets, but thick booklets with hundreds of variables in the equations. The 155 millimeter Long Tom field cannon, one of the most popular big guns used during World War II, incorporates 500 variables in its firing table. Okay, that just sounds like fun, guys. I don't know if any of you have ever played one of those games before, like where you actually try to shoot projectiles a long distance to blow up an enemy. But it's a lot of fun, okay? If I were to do anything in the military, that's the job I want. Preferably, like these video gamers who hide in mobile home parks and conduct drone strikes in other countries. I don't want to have to sit in a tank and potentially get blown up right there. No, from the safety of an air-conditioned unit somewhere, of course. Air temperature, gunpowder temperature, elevation, humidity, wind speed, and direction, and even soil type all are important environmental factors required in the complex calculations. Not surprisingly, these charts were treacherous to calculate. All the variables in hundreds of permutations had to be plugged in and worked out by hand. Mistakes regularly crept in, and calculations restarted from scratch. Just one firing table for one type of gun could take more than a month to complete, and there were surprises. The Army discovered that tables calculated to work in Europe didn't work in Africa because the soil variables were different. Though the guns were delivered, they were little more than dead weight until the firing data could be recalculated from scratch. Quick, somebody bring a nerd! Right? They'd have to fly some nerdy person in to run a bunch of field tests and recalibrate the whole system and book. Squads of clerks, usually women, worked around the clock using pen, paper, and mechanical adding aids to crunch the numbers. Okay, not a nerd, a group of women probably who are nerds. These women were called computers before digital computers existed, and they were incredibly important to the war effort. Firing tables were of such a vital significance that both the Navy and the Army funded separate efforts to build automated calculators, all in the service of aiming giant killing machines, and helped to develop the first digital computers in the process. Most notable among them was the ENIAC, or ENIAC, built for the Army by a team of mathematicians and engineers at University of Pennsylvania's Moore School of Electrical Engineering. The computer was an instant sensation. Robot calculator knocks out figures like chain lightning, declared a newspaper headline in 1948 in an article reporting the unveiling of the ENIAC. Ooh, nice long quote from this newspaper article. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The War Department tonight unveiled the world's fastest calculating machine and said the robot possibly opened the mathematical way to better living for every man. Improved industrial products, better communication and transportation, superior weather forecasting, and other advances in science and engineering may be made possible, the Army said, from the development of the first all-electronic general-purpose computer. The Army described the machine as 1,000 times faster than the most advanced calculating machine previously built and declared the apparatus makes it possible to solve in hours problems which would take years on any other machine. Does everything. The machine, which can add, subtract, multiply, divide, and compute square root as well as do most complex calculations based on those operations, is called the ENIAC, short for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. It also has been nicknamed the Mechanical Einstein. End quote. The ENIAC didn't come fast enough to help with the war, but it stayed in operation for nearly a decade, crunching firing tables, running atomic bomb calculations, and building weather models of the Soviet climate, including mapping the potential spread of fallout from a nuclear war. As powerful as it was, the ENIAC wasn't enough. Sorry, a bug got in my throat, I guess. What's up, everybody? Drink of water. I'm very excited. After I'm done with this, I'm going camping. I think in part 1 of this series, I was talking about how, yeah, I'm not going camping on the 4th of July. I think I was a little extreme, and I said only idiots do that. That's not true. Some great people, I'm sure, go camping on the 4th. I mean, everybody goes. That's the point. So Ann and I, we're going to go, a week later, just so that we can enjoy it, not being so overcrowded. And yeah, we're pretty excited. We're going with some friends, and so it's going to be a good time. Yeah. Once the stream is over, I got to go actually prepare for that. What are you all up to? Let me know in the chat. To develop the computer and networking technology necessary to power a modern radar defense system, a special research division known as the Lincoln Laboratory was created. Attached to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and based out of a research campus 10 miles east of Cambridge, the Lincoln Lab was a joint project of the Navy, Air Force, Army, and IBM. Its sole objective was to build a modern air defense system. An astounding number of resources were thrown at the effort. Thousands of civilian contractors and military personnel were involved over a 10-year period. The software itself took about 1,000 man-years to program. The entire project cost more than the Manhattan Project, the effort to develop the first atomic weapon. Damn, it costs more than the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project's like always the example we use when we think about the state directing scientific research and basically putting a bunch of people in lab coats in a room and saying, okay, you don't get to leave until you get this problem figured out, which is what we need to do to solve the time-energy stultification crisis. But apparently, they've spent more money on science since then. The Lincoln Lab assembled a monster, the Semi-Automatic Ground Environment, or SAGE. It was the biggest computer system in history and the first real computer network. SAGE was controlled by 24 direction centers located strategically around the country. These giant nuclear-proof concrete bunkers housed 2 IBM computers that together cost $4 billion in today's dollars, weighed 600 tons, and took up an acre of floor space. One was always on standby in case the other failed. Each control center employed hundreds of people and was connected to land-based and coastal radar arrays, missile silos, and nearby interceptor aircraft bases. The system could track up to 400 airplanes in real time, scramble fighter jets, launch Nike missiles, and aim anti-aircraft cannons. SAGE was the eyes, ears, and brains of a massive weapon. It was also the first nationwide computerized surveillance machine, surveillance in the broader sense, a system that collected information from remote sensors, analyzed it, and allowed the military to act on the intelligence it produced. I'm excited for where this is going because actually, so far, nothing about this chapter contradicts the first narrative about where the internet comes from. In fact, all of this basically plays into it. The real key is going to be bringing in like how this became hardwired for counterinsurgency. SAGE was an incredibly sophisticated machine, but in practice, it was outdated before it was ever turned on. It went online in the early 1960s, more than 3 years after the Soviet Union had launched the Sputnik and thereby demonstrated its long-range intercontinental missiles capability. The Soviets could shoot a nuclear payload into space and have it come down anywhere in the United States, and no fancy radar defense system could do anything about it. On the surface, SAGE was a boondoggle, but in a bigger historical sense, it was a phenomenal success. MIT Lincoln Laboratory, with its top-notch engineering talent and nearly limitless resources directed at a narrow set of problems, became more than just a research and development center for a single military project. It turned into a training ground for a new engineering elite, a multidisciplinary group of scientists, academics, government officials, businessmen, and mathematicians who would go on to create the modern computer industry and build the internet. And J.C.R. Licklider was at the center of it all. At the Lincoln Laboratory, he worked on the human side of this vast radar computer system and helped develop the system's graphic display, which had to integrate data from multiple radars and to display real-time heading and speed information that could then be used to guide aircraft interceptors. It was a small but vital component of SAGE, and the work opened his eyes to the possibilities of building tools that integrated people and computers into one continuous system. A man-made or a man-machine that broke through human physical limitations and created powerful new hybrid beings. Like us. That's what we are. Or at least that's how I feel when I do stuff with all this software and equipment that it requires to actually do Theory Underground. So, it looks like we've got some new people who've shown up recently. Great to have you all. Make sure to smash the like button. I'm going to re-roll the little intro piece that I use for this show, this series that I've been doing. While doing that, I'm going to adjust my microphone that slid down. Didn't even realize it slid down. And I'm also going to start some coffee. And I'll be right back. So here we go. If you haven't burnt out yet, if you haven't become disillusioned with the hope and belonging salesman, if you still believe in existing movements and institutions, then this just might not be for you. However, the hope is that any earnest learner will find something of value here. What you're about to hear is a transmission that is not supposed to be heard, a message that is not supposed to be possible. Nobody is supposed to know this kind of information. What you are to do with it, I don't know. I don't even know what to do with it. It's not just the book that I'll be reading from today. It's not just the next book that I'll be reading from. In this playlist, it is the way that they are brought together under this common theme. It is a theme of coming to terms with the failures of the 20th century. But also, through this kind of reconciliation, my hope is that some sort of new possibilities will present themselves. Something that is not just this race, class, and sex or gender activism, division, or the simulation of the continuance of movements that long ago fizzled out and were appropriated into being little more than the shock troops of HR's litigation culture agenda that seeks to establish increasing control over the lives, minds, and possibilities of humans who've been reduced to nothing more than labor power, consumers, and niche identarian belonging. This is our situation. Is there a way out? I don't know. I'm back. This next section is called Cyborgs and Cybernetics. This is really important. Think about it. The other tendency of the internet that is not Zizekian is Landian. My fault line theory of the internet is that these two schools of thought, CCRU and the Slovenian school, are the two only real schools of thought that were doing anything new in the 1990s, which was the beginning of cyber history. Of course, the internet existed before that. Like what we're talking about is like the actual material, political, and economic developments that lead to the beginning of cyber history, but which, I believe we figured out starts in 1992. But it was the fact that the Slovenian school and the cybernetic research unit or cybernetic culture research unit were doing what they were doing at that time that made it so that they had such an impact on the internet and the shape that it takes, or at least culturally, theoretically, the shape that it takes. And cybernetics, it's this word that we throw around. We talk about cybernetics, but we don't ever talk about what it really means or where it really comes from. That's what we're going to get into in this section right here. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology was ground zero for a new science called cybernetics. Developed by MIT professor Norbert Wiener, cybernetics defined the world as a giant computational machine. It offered a conceptual and mathematical framework for thinking about and designing complex information systems. Wiener was an odd and brilliant man. He was short, pudgy, with a meaty round head and thick glasses. Sounds like Adorno. In his later years, he looked a bit like Hans Moleman from The Simpsons. He was also a true wunderkind, the son of a strict and ambitious academic and Slavic scholar. Wiener was forced to memorize entire books and recite them from memory and to perform complex algebra and trigonometry in his head. My father would be doing his homework for Harvard, and I had to stand beside him and recite my lessons by memory, even in Greek, at 6 years old, and he would ignore me until I made the simplest mistake. Then he would verbally reduce me to dust, he recalled in his autobiography. Damn. That sounds like a fascinating autobiography. With this kind of training, Wiener went to college at the age of 11, the infant prodigy of Boston. Is it Viner? Or am I pronouncing this wrong? I'm gonna stick with Wiener. Who knows? It could be Viner. I mean, it sounds like it would be, but I'm going to stick with Wiener. Because I've heard people say Wiener before when referring to him, so I don't know. With this kind of training, Wiener went to college at the age of 11. The infant prodigy of Boston, one newspaper called him, earned a PhD in mathematics by age 18 and rejected from a job at Harvard, started teaching at MIT. His life of frantic study and pitiless criticism from his father didn't prepare him for the social dimension of life. He was clumsy, couldn't talk to women, had few friends, was depressive, and could barely take care of himself. Wow, sounds almost like everybody on the internet. The father of the internet was clumsy, couldn't talk to women, had few friends, was depressive, and could barely take care of himself. His parents arranged his marriage to Margaret Engemann, an immigrant from Germany who had had trouble finding a husband. They had 2 normal daughters, and the marriage seemed fine except for one little detail. Margaret was a steadfast supporter of Adolf Hitler and forced their daughters to read Mein Kampf. Uh-oh. One day she told us that the members of her family in Germany had been certified as Judenrein, free of Jewish taint. She thought we'd be pleased to know, recalled her daughter. She said I should not feel sorry for the Jews of Germany because they were not very nice people. During a Christmas party, she tried to convince guests that Aryan lineage stretched back to the Son of God himself. Jesus was the son of a German mercenary stationed in Jerusalem, and this had been scientifically proven. That's a quote, as she apparently said. It was an awkward situation given that her husband was a Jew of German descent, and her daughters were thereby half Jewish. But this was no ordinary household. What a fucking situation to be in. Wow. She's all, I'm free of my lineage is free of Jewish taint. And then she's like telling that to her kids who are like half Jewish. Wiener's mind was perpetually hungry, devouring everything in its path. He crossed just about every disciplinary boundary, cutting through philosophy, mathematics, engineering, linguistics, philosophy, psychology, evolutionary biology, neurobiology, and computer science. During World War II, Wiener met a problem that tested the limits of his brilliant multidisciplinary brain. He was recruited to work on a quixotic top-secret venture to build an automatic aiming targeting mechanism that could increase the effectiveness of ground-to-air anti-aircraft cannons. All through the war, he worked on a specialized computer apparatus that used microwave radar to watch, pinpoint, and then predict a plane's future position on the basis of its pilot's actions in order to more effectively blast it out of the sky. It was a machine that studied the actions of a human being and responded dynamically to them. While building it, he had a profound insight about the nature of information. He began to see that the communication of information wasn't just an abstract or ephemeral act, but had a powerful physical property to it. Like an invisible force, it could be relied on to trigger a reaction. He also made another simple but profound leap. He realized that communication and transmission of messages were not limited to humans, but pervaded all living organisms and could be designed into the mechanical world as well. Wiener published these ideas in a dense 1948 tract called Cybernetics, Control, and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. Somebody in the chat said might be interesting to also talk about yesterday's French radical left win. Yeah, I mean, all I'll really say about that is that I don't really care or find it that interesting who wins or loses elections. And I think that a fascination and preoccupation with such things reduces you to perpetually watching Sam Cedar as opposed to actually trying to understand the world situation that we are in, where one side wins, the other side loses. It's back and forth, tug of war, and they jerk themselves off in circles that go nowhere forever. And then we've been in this sort of going nowhere deadlock for 100 years, and that things that happen in other countries are infinitely less important than what happens in the United States, because the United States has boots on the soil of over 150 other countries, whereas France is a has-been, as is England. I mean, I'm sorry, but like these are places where things used to happen and where power used to be concentrated, but it's not. Power is more or less diffuse like capital, but insofar as it is centralized, it's centralized in the United States. And it is the United States deadlock that is the one that ultimately matters. And people who identify as left tend to use some sort of, abstract association with European left history to get out of the cognitive dissonance of supporting the left of their actually existing country. That's why you always get this, oh, I'm left but not liberal, and oh, what I really mean by left, and oh, they're not really left. So I just feel depressed when I see people getting all excited about the win in France. I just get depressed. But I'm not depressed normally because there's a lot of reasons to not be depressed. They're just not that. Anyway, they were devices which make decisions on the basis of decisions they have made in the past, he explained. To Wiener, people and the entire living world could be seen as one giant interlocking information machine, everything responding to everything else in an intricate system of cause, effect, and feedback. So, I mean, let's just take a couple of these principles here. We've got cause, effect, and feedback, and he's talking about how information can cause reaction. To say that we are in a deadlock that is going nowhere is to say that there's a kind of feedback loop, which is a cybernetic process where certain kinds of information necessarily cause certain kinds of reaction. People who call themselves left are caught up and part of that very system. And being against that system and being against those who are part of the establishment within that system and trying to push them left, that's all part of that's literally part of it. Wiener predicted that our lives would increasingly be mediated and enhanced by computers and integrated to the point that there would cease to be any difference between us and the larger cybernetic machine in which we lived. Despite being full of incomprehensible mathematical proofs and jargon, the book excited the public's imagination and became an instant bestseller. Military circles received it as a revolutionary work as well. What Karl Marx's Das Kapital did for 19th century socialists, Wiener's cybernetics did for America's anti-communist cold warriors. On a very basic level, cybernetics posited that human beings, like all living things, were information processing machines. We were all computers, highly complex, but computers nonetheless. That meant that the military could construct machines that could think like people and act like people, scan for enemy planes and ships, transcribe enemy radio communications, spy on subversives, analyze foreign news for hidden meaning and secret messages, all without needing sleep or food or rest. With computer technology like this, America's dominance was guaranteed. Cybernetics triggered an elusive, decades-long quest for the military to fulfill this particular vision of cybernetics, an effort to create computers with what we now call artificial intelligence. Cybernetic concepts, backed by huge amounts of military funding, began to pervade academic disciplines: economics, engineering, psychology, political science, biology, and environmental studies. Neoclassical economists integrated cybernetics into their theories and began looking at markets as distributed information machines. Ecologists began to look at the Earth itself as a self-regulating computational biosystem, and cognitive psychologists and cognitive scientists approached the study of the human brain as if it were literally a complex digital computer. Political scientists and sociologists began to dream of using cybernetics to create a controlled utopian society, a perfectly well-oiled system where computers and people were integrated into a cohesive whole, managed and controlled to ensure security and prosperity. Put most clearly, in the 1950s, both the military and U.S. industry explicitly advocated a messianic understanding of computing in which computation was the underlying matter of everything in the social world and could therefore be brought under state capitalist military control, centralized hierarchical control, writes historian David Golumbia in The Cultural Logic of Computation, a groundbreaking study of computational ideology. Ooh, that one looks really good, actually. I'm going to go ahead and pop that into Google and look at it later. In a big way, this intermeshing of cybernetics and big power was what caused Norbert Wiener to turn against cybernetics almost as soon as he introduced it to the world. He saw scientists and military men taking the narrowest possible interpretation of cybernetics to create better killing machines and more efficient systems of surveillance and control and exploitation. He saw giant corporations using his ideas to automate production and cut labor in their quest for greater wealth and economic power. He began to see that in a society mediated by computer and information systems, those who controlled the infrastructure wielded ultimate power. Wiener envisioned a bleak future and realized that he himself was culpable, comparing his work on cybernetics to that of the world's greatest scientists who unleashed the destructive power of atomic weapons. In fact, he saw cybernetics in even starker terms than nukes. The impact of the thinking machine will be a shock certainly of comparable order to that of the atomic bomb, he said in a 1949 interview. The replacement of human labor with machines and the social destabilization, mass unemployment, and concentrated economic power that such change would cause is what worried Wiener the most. Let us remember that the automated machine, whatever we think of any feelings it may or may not have, is the precise economic equivalent of slave labor. Any labor which competes with slave labor must accept the economic conditions of slave labor. It is perfectly clear that this will produce an unemployment situation in comparison with which the present recession and even the depression of the 30s will seem a pleasant joke. Wiener wrote in a dark and prescient follow-up book, The Human Use of Human Beings, Cybernetics and Society. Any labor which competes with slave labor must accept the economic conditions of slave labor. That is such a fucking good line. Yeah, it's a good point, right? And machines are constantly re-rationalizing everything and reducing socially necessary labor time. And that creates insanely inhumane conditions for the people who have to compete against the machines, or the handful of privileged people who are actually not privileged, who actually have to run the machines. The destruction would be political and economic. After popularizing cybernetics, Wiener became a kind of labor and anti-war activist. He reached out to unions to warn them of the danger of automation and the need to take the threat seriously. He turned down offers from giant corporations that wanted help automating their supply lines according to his cybernetic principles and refused to work on military research projects. He was against the massive peacetime arms buildup taking place after World War II and publicly lashed out at colleagues for working to help the military build bigger, more efficient tools of destruction. He increasingly hinted at his insider knowledge that a colossal state machine was being constructed by government agencies for the purpose of combat and domination, a computerized information system that was, quote, sufficiently extensive to include all civilian activities during war, before war, and possibly even between wars, as he described in The Human Use of Human Beings. I think the human use of human beings is probably one of the other most important sources to follow up Surveillance Valley, which is the book that I'm reading from right now. Because think about it. It's the father of the internet. It's the father of cybernetics. It's the guy who's afraid of having caused basically exactly what Nick Land in his most drug-addled and horny for the apocalypse, post-human moments is wanting, right? And I think the most important part there is a computerized information system that was sufficiently extensive to include all civilian activities during, before, and possibly even between wars. Possibly even between. My assumption is they figured that one out by the 90s when they started mainstreaming the internet. This was all already a well-oiled machine. It's not that complicated to see how people saying a certain thing causes a certain kind of opposite reaction. It's not hard to see how a leftist win creates a rightist backlash, how a rightist backlash creates a leftist backlash, and how these two things keep themselves jerking each other off forever at the end of history rather than actually paving any way forward outside of the current situation. It's not hard. It wasn't hard for them. They were smart. They're smart enough to be able to figure these things out. Wiener's vocal support of labor and his public opposition to corporate and military work made him a pariah among his military contractor engineer colleagues. It also earned him a spot on J. Edgar Hoover's FBI subversive surveillance list. For years, he was suspected of having communist sympathies, his life documented in a thick FBI file that was closed upon his death in 1964. Yeah, so 64. He was warning because he could see this was developing. He knew what he had started, but he died in 64. He didn't even get to see it really take off. Of mice and keyboards. Now, I have to go get my coffee that I started earlier. What's up, everybody? Looks like we got a lot more people here now. Great to see you all. Curious how it's all going. Where's everybody at in the world right now? I know most of you are listening while working, and so you are AFK and incapable of saying anything. But if you happen to take a bathroom break, go ahead and let me know what's up. What am I going to play while I'm away? I'm going to play something I don't normally play. What should I play? Now, I've played a lot of the Ivan Illich commercial lately. I've played a lot of the old June Theory Underground PSA when I'm away. I'm going to play the old $50 patrons sort of commercial thing. All right, so 2 changes just to kind of give you a heads up about this. Bert's still around. Bert's still a patron. I used to only take $50 patron pledges in the early days of Theory Underground because I didn't want too many small patron pledges. And that's changed. Now, anybody who wants to support the free content at Theory Underground on YouTube and podcasts everywhere can become a patron at the Patreon. That some people get confused. There's too many ways to subscribe, so they think that by becoming a subscriber over at Substack, that means that they are now a Theory Underground subscriber in the sense that they are a monthly member where they get access to all the ongoing stuff behind the scenes. Or that they think that means that they get the discounts that the monthly membership gets. The monthly membership is only through the website. You go to the theoryunderground.com site and just click on get involved, and that's how to do that. It's not through the Substack. Sorry for anyone for whom that's caused confusion. I'll always give you your money back if you want it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, look, there's too many subscriptions for everything. But the patrons are just people who want to fund the public work. And they are awesome. And Bert is the OG of them all. Here we go. Also, it has the old Theory Underground logo. Like I said, it's outdated.
I couldn't believe it when I saw that poster. Baudrillard in Boise, fucking Idaho. Are you kidding me? It was virtually an answer to an unspoken prayer, It really was. And I just couldn't believe that somebody was interested in the things that I was interested in, that I had been interested in for years and had kind of given up on in futility. I'd labored in solitude for so long. I had no one to talk to about it, no one to bounce ideas off of. It just vastly accelerated. My ability, I don't get too philosophical, to interrogate, to inquire, and to see connections between things.
And so the theory underground that Dave is developing in this mission is trying to reach an audience of people who aren't just doing philosophy in a university setting. Why is there an advantage to doing philosophy outside of an academic setting?
Well, the neat thing is that you can really drill down. You know, when you're in school, you have to do 50 things, and you do them all partially. And it's like you're digging a well, and you're digging very shallow wells. When you can drill down deep and take your time and really get into something, especially with a company of fellows, that you get into the slipstream of a great philosopher, and you just have to take the deep dive. But initially, a lot of these philosophers, they're speaking to a tradition, they're trying to resolve specific problems, and they just assume you know what those are, that you've had their life experience. So the first time you read them, you're just trying to get the lay of the land, and you may well have some insights. You may wrongly associate certain things you know with what they're saying, but then you'll maybe look at a secondary text, and now, since you have something to bring to the table, all the lights start going off. And then when you read the philosopher the second time, you can read them more knowledgeably, and so you're looking for things, you're better able to follow along, you're not left behind so much. The third reading, though, and these are for profound books. I mean, you don't have to read everything like this, but for a profound text, the third reading is where you've learned enough that you relate it to everything else you know, that you begin to see the connectedness between what this philosopher is doing and the implicit, unstated situation that they were speaking to initially. You know something about that, and you see the connection between that and all sorts of other things, and you connect it to your life and the way you live and move through the world and the way you see things and interact with people, and you are not just absorbing, you're creating, you're a co-creator. When it's all said and done, you just have to put it into your own words. And there's a danger of reductionism there, but when you put it into your own words and you're bringing all these different strands together, it's really phenomenal. And that's what the third reading does.
So, a few years ago, Dave, running the Theory Clip channel, had a Patreon going and discontinued accepting money from people. But since then, you have continued to make a donation monthly. And it's obviously very meaningful to Dave, meaningful to me as well, being Dave's partner. And so, why do you do that? Essentially.
Well, Dave brings people together. Whatever Dave is doing is valuable, and my life was completely changed, and I'm grateful. I can't afford to give Dave $50 a month, but I do because it brings me joy. Every time I get my Social Security, the first thing I do is send $50 to Dave, and my heart sings. And it's a sense of gratitude. I don't feel obligated to do it. I want to do it. And I want to do whatever I can to help Dave do for other people what he did for me. And I want that to continue. And it's truly, I take great joy in it. It's the best $50 I spend a month. It really is. If you can plant a seed where a handful of people meet each other and they can all have the experience that we've had face to face.
If you haven't... Okay, I'm back. A couple things I want to say really quick. That is not a a video that I play very often on this channel. And part of the reason is like, I mean, it's all sappy and long, and I normally have more important sort of updates to give. But I love Bert, and I want to give everyone a sense for several things that he does in that video. One of the really important ones is the importance of rereading. Profound texts have to be revisited, and more importantly, at least 3 times. I just put an article out on the Substack. I just republished this article called 3 Principles of Study as a Way of Life, and the Bert Principle is one of those 3. It's inspired by what he said right there, which is something that he's been saying for years and years that I've known him. He says that. I just have to say also, I have told him so many times to stop supporting me, like financially. I don't like it, guys. If you're in a rough situation, stop giving me your money, please. I have a scholarship that you can fill out. He's like, as soon as I get my Social Security check, I gotta give money to. I'm like, stop it! Don't do that. Stop saying that. I don't want it. But he said the whole thing about his heart singing when he does it. He means it, and he says it like a poet. But also there's like this interesting thing about just like by having his skin in the game and by actually doing this material, like concrete thing that is undeniable. It's not just words. Even though he doesn't do the courses at Theory Underground, he is able to wake up every day and approach his bookcase and his own research questions in his life of the mind, in a sense of like solidarity, in a sense of like, there's like this inspiration. He knows that he can do it, and he knows he's got someone to talk to about it, because he knows we're always going to go back out to breakfast or brunch or whatever it is, because we go whenever we can. Okay. So that's Bert. Now you know about Bert. Yeah. Andrew R. from Canada said that he's only got 3 more minutes before he's got to get back to work, and that he loves to start his morning with me. That's, thanks, Andrew. That's great to hear. That's awesome. Yeah. And Michael Portman said, to keep watching the works that speak of the history of the internet, or watch the Game Grumps play gas station simulator that just dropped, The Struggle of Man. To watch the Game Grumps play gas station simulator? It just dropped, huh? Yeah, well, none of it's going anywhere. You can access all of it later. But I recommend sticking around for this here right now, because I, as an actual individual who's literally here right now, living and breathing, doing this thing, will get more energy if you are there actually engaged. And this is all available for people to listen to after the fact. But having a handful of people who are actually like here for it really helps. I mean, that was like Nance's main function for the last year, was being the person who's just like there. And it gives me like this kind of like grounding and energy to know that there's somebody who's actually there, because when there's no one there, I just feel like I don't know. I might just not be autistic enough to really be able to talk to a camera when I don't actually know that there's someone there, but I do. I need to know that someone's actually there. I gotta like, knowing that people will watch it after the fact, doesn't really do the same thing. So, of Mice and Keyboards, J.C.R. Lickleader interacted with Norbert Wiener at MIT and participated in conferences and dinner parties where cybernetic ideas were hashed out, debated, and discussed. He was radicalized by Wiener's cybernetic vision. Where Wiener saw danger, Lick saw opportunity. He had no qualms about putting this technology in the service of U.S. corporate and military power. Though most computer engineers thought of computers as little more than oversized calculators, Lick saw them as extensions of the human mind, and he became obsessed with designing machines that could be seamlessly coupled to human beings. Damn. In 1960, he published a paper that outlined his vision for the coming man-computer symbiosis and described in simple terms the kind of computer components that needed to be invented to make it happen. The paper The paper essentially described a modern multi-purpose computer, complete with a display, keyboard, speech recognition software, networking capabilities, and applications that could be used in real time for a variety of tasks. It seems obvious to us now, but back then Licht's ideas were visionary. His paper was widely circulated in defense circles and earned him an invitation by the Pentagon to do a series of lectures on the topic. Quote, my first experience with computers had been listening to a talk by mathematician John von Neumann in Chicago back in 1948. It sounded like science fiction then, a machine that could carry out algorithms automatically, recalled Charles Herzfeld, a physicist who would go on to serve as the director of ARPA in the mid-1960s. The quote goes on right here, but the next big shock was Licht. Not only could we use these machines for massive calculations, but we could make them useful in our everyday lives. I listened. I got very excited. And in a very real sense, I became a disciple from then on. Indeed, Licht's papers and interviews show that he thought almost any problem could be solved with the right application of computers. He even came up with a plan to end poverty and stimulate young ghetto blacks by having them tinker with computers. He called the process dynamations, a 1960s version of an idea that is very popular in Silicon Valley even today, 50 years later. The belief that teaching poor kids to code will somehow magically lift them out of poverty and boost global literacy and education rates. Quote, what is difficult to convey in a few words is the almost messianic view carried by Licht leader and the potential for advances in the use of computers, the way people could relate to computers, and the resultant impact on how people would come to make decisions, explained an internal declassified ARPA report. Licht infected everyone with his enthusiasm for the coming computer revolution, including top people at ARPA, who were also on a quest to leverage computers to boost military effectiveness. Michael said, yes, I stuck around and was being a bit cheeky to evoke the ever-present draw of the void. Oh, I know you're joking, but I still responded like it might be serious, because I know everybody's being recommended all of these other shiny videos to go click on too. And I do like to always be like, hey, this is for people after the fact more than the people who are here right now. But I think I say that too often. And not often enough do I say, hey, it actually does matter having people engaged. It actually does matter. Thank you for being here. Sahil says, I feel isolated by fam and the grind. Love your work. And to get to tune in every now and then. Keep it up, please. Thanks, Sahil. That's not the Sahil that we do the Marxism stuff with, by the way. That's a different Sahil. In fact, I think I've got at least 3 Sahils in my audience. And Sahil Mishra is one of them. Great to have you, Mishra. At the time, computers were giant metal monsters that occupied entire basements and were attended by multiple technicians. Despite their complexity and size, they were primitive and had less computational power than a 1990s graphic calculator. They also ran one program at a time, and each one had to be fed in by hand using punch cards. Imagine trying, for example, to direct a battle with the aid of a computer on such a schedule as this, Licht explained in his 1960 paper. You formulate your problem today. Tomorrow you spend with a programmer. Next week, the computer devotes 5 minutes to assembling your program and 47 seconds to calculating the answer to your problem. You get a sheet of paper 20 feet long, full of numbers that, instead of providing a final solution, only suggest a tactic that should be explored by simulation. Obviously, the battle would be over before the second step in its planning was begun. And networks? They existed, but like the network that tied Sage together, they were usually highly specialized and built for a particular purpose and function. A network would have to be designed and custom built to fit every new situation. The way Licht saw it, this was the wrong way to handle the command and control technology problem. What ARPA needed was to develop a universal and standardized computer and networking platform that could be modified with minimal effort to handle just about any task, missile tracking, behavioral studies, databases, voice communication, intelligence analysis, or simple text processing and mail functions. This computer framework would have a few basic underlying components. It would be easy to use and have an intuitive graphical user interface, feature a universal operating system and programs that could be loaded onto it, and most important, would move away from the calculator mode of computer operation by allowing users to work in real time in the same way people interact with one another. Though this may sound basic and obvious, these kinds of computer tools did not exist in the early 1960s. Quote, there was the belief in the heads of a number of people, a small number, that people could become very much more effective in their thinking and decision making if they had the support of a computer system, good displays, and so forth, good databases, computation at your command. It was the kind of image that we were working toward the realization of, explained Lick in an ARPA report. It really wasn't a command and control research program. It was an interactive computing program. And my belief was, and still is, you can't really do command and control outside the framework of such a thing. The crude state of computer technology meant that Lick's goal was still years away, and one thing was for sure, it wouldn't be invented on its own. Someone had to do the work. As Lick saw it, ARPA's primary mission was to throw money at engineers who could build the underlying computer components that a modern command and control system required. At a minimum, ARPA would at least get people working on computer projects that pointed in the right direction. Lick saw his job in historical terms. He would use ARPA's budget and influence to push the computer industry into new territory, one that aligned with his vision and the needs of the defense establishment. But first, he wanted to make sure that U.S. intelligence agencies hadn't secretly developed this kind of interactive computing technology already. Quote, I even went over to the CIA and gave them a pitch, he said Lick. I had to tell them, look, I do not know what you're doing about this. I hope you're doing the following, but let me tell you about what I am doing, and then maybe we can figure some way to talk about what the relations are. He also arranged a meeting with reps from the NSA and made the same pitch about the beauty of a universal, easy-to-use computer platform. Neither agency was working on interactive computing, but they sure wanted to get their hands on it. Quote, the NSA, they really needed what I wanted, he recalled in an interview years later. Indeed, intelligence agencies were among the first users of the tools ARPA's command and control program produced just a few years later. ARPA's initial command and control research budget was $10 million. Lick spread that cash through his personal and professional networks in the military academic contractor world. He bankrolled projects on interactive computing and time sharing, graphical interface design, networking, and artificial intelligence at MIT, UC Berkeley, UCLA, Harvard, Carnegie, Mellon University, Stanford, and the RAND Corporation. At MIT, Lick set up one of his biggest and most important initiatives, Project MAC, short for Machine-Aided Cognition, which evolved into a sophisticated interactive computer environment complete with email, bulletin boards, and multiplayer video games. Jeez. MIT's Project MAC spawned the first crop of hackers, ARPA contractors who tinkered with these giant computers in their free time. At the Stanford Research Institute, which was also doing ARPA contract work on chemical warfare in Vietnam, Lick funded Douglas C. Engelbart's Augmentation Research Center. This team became legendary in computer circles. It developed hypertext links, multi-user real-time word processing, video conferencing, and most notably the computer mouse. Lick also jump-started a whole range of networking projects, efforts that would lead directly to the creation of the internet. One of these was a $1.5 million joint UCLA-UC Berkeley initiative to develop software and hardware for a network that connected multiple computers to multiple users. As a funding proposal explained, this research would be used directly to improve military networks, including the National Military Command System, which was then a new communication system linking the military to the president. Lick worked hard and fast, and his efforts at ARPA were remarkable. Companies like General Electric and IBM did not initially accept his ideas about interactive computing, but With his tenacity in ARPA's funding, his vision gained traction and popularity and ultimately changed the direction of the computer industry. His tenure at ARPA achieved something else as well. Computer science became more than just a subdivision of electrical engineering. It developed into a proper field of study of its own. The long-term research contracts the ARPA Command and Control Research Division handed out to research teams helped seed the creation of independent computer science departments in universities across the country and tied them closely through funding and personnel to the U.S. military establishment. As I've said elsewhere, I do have a reading lined up for this series that I'm very excited to read eventually here on stream. It's going to go a lot more in depth into this joiner between the U.S. military establishment and the university research, institutional matrix, right? And one of the things that I'm thinking about what Sahil said is like feeling isolated by family in the grind. And I just wanted to say that, like, if you have obligations to family, leave the family, leave everything you know, no, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. But no, I feel like almost everybody at Theory Underground is in a situation where the grind is keeping you down. You're not able to do the readings that you want to be able to do. And you are trying your best to be a good parent, a good husband, a good father, maybe a wife, maybe a mother. But the chances are, I know my statistics, a lot of y'all, most of everyone here is a guy. There's some noteworthy women, but a lot of guys are feeling especially isolated and obligated to do multiple things at once. One is like being a democratic citizen, or at least knowing why you shouldn't even care about that. And that requires like an actual basis in political theory, and critical theory is going to become a huge factor if you realize that previous what is to be done style tracts didn't bring about any real kinds of solutions or change, and you're trying to figure out why, right? And so there are these people who give you hope, but at the same time, that hope leads you to despair. And feeling the grind getting you down, feeling like you never have any time energy, feeling that time energy lack, and feeling like this infinitely expanding list of things to read, it crushes your soul. And I think that in the same way that when, there's this saying, happy wife, happy life, there's also, there needs to be like a saying that is sort of like, father based in the history of ideas and a close enough approximation to the current situation to have some kind of a sense for what's really going on, so that he's not being constantly pulled around by the seat of his pants by whatever he hears on the media and whatever's trending in the moment, makes for a happy household, and that makes for a happy wife. Something like that. The basic idea being this sort of like obsessive theory thing that some of us have to do that goes way deep into the weeds, a lot more than maybe some people require, right? It's actually necessary. And because you can't do that yourself, you got to slipstream somebody else who's doing it. And that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to do it so you can all slipstream me, which is to say, if you're feeling exhausted, if you're feeling down, if you are constantly second guessing yourself, if you're feeling pulled in multiple directions and you're not able to really get any traction and get a line of thought to a point where it could collect a bunch of stuff that you've read and then get it into some kind of an order that could then be unpacked and thought through with other people, don't worry. For now, you can kind of just slipstream me doing it, and you'll get my energy from it. And this energy will be bottled up and repeatable in a way that it's almost like a simulation of time energy. You don't have large energy infused repeatable blocks of time, but you have Theory Underground videos, and those feel like they are large energy infused repeatable blocks of time, because in a sort of sense they are. You can repeat them. You can listen to them on repeat. And by doing so, you'll slowly get the value of if you had been doing that yourself. But of course you can't, because you have to work, just like I've always had to work, except that I don't have to work the same as I always used to, because now, thanks to my subscribers and patrons, I've been able to quit working at Amazon. And now the only jobs I do for other people are ones that I want to do, like this one where I'll be working teaching Sociology 101 in the fall. I'll do it as long as I want to. I'll quit if for some reason I want to. I don't feel the need to pursue a tenure track. And that means that I'm freer in my research. I'm freer in my teaching. And it's just a win-win-win all around. And yeah, it's something I'm insanely grateful for. And it's only really started registering with me in the last month, because I've never felt this way before. You know, I've always had to work. I keep feeling like I'm going to have to go back to work next week. And then I realize, oh no, I can keep working on my lectures. I can keep working on what I'm interested in doing right now. Wow, crazy. Michael said, the historically minded dad makes home life pretty rad. I'll sub the word historically with theoretically only because otherwise, I mean, history without theory is just ideology. But yes, 100%. The theory-minded dad makes home life pretty rad. Mark Corbett Wilson says, Ray McGovern calls this matrix the MICMAT, which stands for Military Industrial Congressional Intelligence Media Academia Think Tank. That's based. And what is that from? Catherine said, noteworthy woman? Great to have you, Catherine. I knew that there was someone in the audience. Yeah, welcome. Statistically, there's always like 3 to 5 based women in every philosophy group with, 20 to 30 guys. And look, let's be honest. 15 of those guys are probably tourists. They're probably just looking for some jargon to pick up and pass off so they can, pose as intelligent next time they're getting sloshed with the boys. Or next time somebody in a situation makes them uncomfortable, they're going to try to theory bomb their way out of the situation. And so that's why you get a lot of tourists and posers in theory spaces. But yeah, no, there's always a bunch of really cool women and probably an equal number of really cool guys. The rest of y'all, who knows where you're going after this phase in your life, but I'm glad you're here for now, and I hope you get a lot out of it. Mark Corbett Wilson says Donna Haraway wrote the Cyborg Manifesto, challenging traditional notions of gender identity and technology. Yep. Yeah, I know. And it's like in critical theory, like people buy into the Donna Haraway approach to thinking about the human like wholesale. It's kind of crazy. Like cybernetics, the science of control invented by anti-communists, is being applied uncritically by theory bros and Haraway simps to think about humans as basically being nothing more than computers because it's fun and edgy. I don't like it. It's really crazy to me. Like, I think that we have to imminently critique cybernetics, but to just embrace cybernetics and the cybernetic conception of the human, well, okay then. Networking, the dark side. Computer history, and I know that's a kind of a hot take, so I'll just stop myself. That's kind of a hot take. I don't want my hot takes as I go through these kinds of readings to deter anybody else from getting something from these. So I just want you all to know, everyone's welcome to disagree with me on things like that. Of course you are. I think this is a very important text, and it's important for the reasons that I've sort of already explained. But if you ultimately disagree with me on myriad things, well, I hope it'll be useful to you for your own purposes. Networking. The dark side. Computer history buffs consider Lick one of the most important personalities in the development of computer science and the internet. A 500-page biography called The Dream Machine by M. Mitchell Waldrop chronicles Lick's life and work. What almost never gets reported, but what comes through the pages and pages of released and declassified government files covering Lick's tenure at ARPA, is just how much his computer research efforts were infused with the agency's greater counterinsurgency mission. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting to it. Lick died in 1990, a few months shy of turning 75. In interviews, he had made sure to distance his efforts at ARPA from the agency's less wholesome work fighting insurgencies. Quote, "This was a kind of a cloak and dagger part of it," he recalled in a 1988 interview. "There was a fellow named Bill Godel who, it seemed to me, was always trying to get control over what I was doing. I could never tell what he was doing, so that part made me nervous. For those who don't remember Bill Godel, the whole first chapter of this book had it was just Godel. This guy was instrumental in fighting the Viet Cong in Vietnam and using all kinds of new-fangled ways of doing counterinsurgency, right? I could never tell what he was doing, so that part made me nervous. I had one project that I wasn't clear deeply enough to know what was, and that made me nervous. He readily conceded that he knew something shady was cooking at ARPA and hinted that he took part in some of it, but claimed that he resisted attempts to involve his command and control project in unsavory Vietnam counterinsurgency efforts. Quote, "I sort of stayed out of that as best I could," he explained. The truth is a bit stickier. Lick's job was to develop the underlying computer and networking technology necessary to fight modern wars. Naturally, this applied to counterinsurgency in a very general way, but his work was also much more specific and direct. For instance, documents show that in March 1962, he attended an influential U.S. Army symposium that convened in Washington, D.C. to discuss how behavioral science and computer technology could be used to better wage limited war and counterinsurgency. There, Lick was part of a working group dedicated to crafting a U.S. Army counterinsurgency research program that could meet a multidimensional communist challenge in paramilitary warfare, in psychological warfare, and in the conventional and nuclear field. The symposium took place just as Lick was starting his job as head of ARPA's Behavioral Science Command and Control Research Divisions. Going forward, his work at ARPA was part of the military's larger counterinsurgency efforts and directly overlapped with William Godel's Project Agile. Naturally, many of ARPA's programs in Southeast Asia, from remote control drones to electric sensor fences and large-scale human intelligence gathering, were all tied in one way or another to data collection and communication, and they ultimately depended on computer technology to organize and automate these tasks. They necessitated tools that could ingest data on people and political movements, compile searchable databases, tie in radio and satellite communications, build models, predict human behavior, and share data quickly and efficiently over great distances between different agencies. Building the underlying technology that could power all newfangled communication platforms was Lick's job. He certainly never shied away from steering research toward counterinsurgency applications. A glance at the contracts from those days shows him directing funds to projects that used computers for everything from studying and predicting the behavior of people and political systems to modeling human cognitive processes and developing simulations that predicted, quote, the behavior of international systems, end quote. Records show that as early as 1963, Lick's Command and Control Division was sharing and intermingling funds with William Godel's Project Agile. Indeed, even as Lick started at ARPA, Project Agile was, and I want to know, does anybody know how much Talcott Parsons or Nicholas Luhmann was related to any of these people? I'm very interested in the ways that different branches of sociology, especially ones that were popular in the United States during this period, might have been involved, and considering the fact that both Parsons and Luhmann are social systems thinkers who think about everything as inputs and outputs and cybernetic feedback loops, who think about all humans and institutions from this sort of technocratic standpoint. I figure that they might have some kind of a role in all of this. Indeed, even as Lick started at ARPA, Project Agile was deploying data-driven counterinsurgency initiatives in the field. One of the earliest took place between 1962 and 63 at ARPA's Combat Development Test Center in Thailand on the outskirts of Bangkok. It was called Anthropometric Survey and the Royal Thai Armed Forces. On the surface, it was a benign study that sought to measure the body size of several thousand Thai military personnel to aid in the design of equipment and uniforms. It collected 52 different data points, everything from sitting height to buttock knee length to crotch thigh circumference, and seven different measurements of the face and head. Okay. It's my people, by the way, the Royal Thai Armed Forces. I think I am in a brotherhood with these people. If you've watched enough Theory Underground content, you probably know that story at this point, so I'm not going to repeat it, but yeah, I might be in a gang. The survey's data points had the unpleasant feel of a eugenics study, but the physical measurements were just the surface level of the study. The deeper purpose was rooted in prediction and control. Quote, Thai participants were also asked a bevy of personal questions, not just where and when they were born, but who their ancestors were, what their religion was, and what they thought of the King of Thailand, explains Annie Jacobson in The Pentagon's Brain. These questions were at the heart of the study's true goal, to create a computer profile of each Thai serviceman and then use it to test predictive models. ARPA wanted to create a prototype showing how it could monitor third world armies for future use. The information would be saved in computers stored in a secure military facility. In 1962, Thailand was a relatively stable country, but it was surrounded by insurgency and unrest on all sides. If Thailand were to become a battle zone, ARPA would have information on Thai soldiers, each of whom could be tracked. Information, like who deserted the Thai army and became an enemy combatant, could be ascertained. Using computer models, ARPA could create algorithms describing human behavior in remote areas. KCF says, I'm here because I saw you are in enemy territory and your side lost a long time ago. And that seems accurate. Other than that, I don't know what's going on here. Welcome. Great to have you. This is me reading chapter 2 of Surveillance Valley, which is the secret military history of the internet. It's by Yasha Levine. Yasha Levine, I believe, is like a liberal who wrote an expose on the Tea Party back in the day. That's what my journalist friend told me back when he was telling me about this book in the first place, and I got super interested in it. And when I finally checked it out, I found it to be even more relevant to the sort of post-left kind of research that I was already doing, the kind of research that you start doing once you realize this is all going nowhere, everything is so scripted. It seems like every slogan, every action, every protest, every statement, every movement is meant to create its opposite. And the people who are the most engaged in it are either just selling hope to people who are duped by the electoral process or system, or people who ultimately parasitically live off telling those people that they're not doing it good enough or seriously enough, or putting that kind of pressure on them. And usually by giving them some kind of a historical basis to this European idea of the left, so as to sort of launder 21st century progressive bullshit, so that people feel okay living in their skin at one of the worst times to be alive if you genuinely want or need some indication that progress is real. If you need that, you're going to be pretty desperate for cope. And there are some people lined up to sell it to you. They are lined up out the door, baby. Hopium. Exactly. The link between counterinsurgency and computers is not that surprising. The first rudimentary computer technology was developed in the United States almost a century before the Vietnam War to count, categorize, and study masses of people. In the late 1880s, an American by the name of Herman Hollerith invented a tabulation machine under contract with the U.S. government to speed the process of counting people for the U.S. Census. Because of a huge immigration influx, the census had become so unwieldy that it took a full decade to finish the count by hand. Hollerith came up with an elegant electromechanical solution, a contraption that would later become the backbone of international business machines. IBM, the oldest computer company in the world. He hasn't mentioned this, but also like IBM, a lot of its bedrock was built around and for the Nazis so that they could run census data or collect census data off the population, which was then obviously used shortly thereafter to round people up into death camps. So IBM, special company, that one. His design broke down the process of automatic data calculation into two general steps. First, data was digitized, that is, converted into a format that could be understood by a machine via a series of holes punched in a piece of paper. The second step involved feeding this paper into an apparatus containing electrical pins that tabulated and sorted the punch cards on the basis of position and arrangement of the punched holes. Hollerith initially thought to record the information on a long strip of paper, like a ticker tape, but he quickly abandoned the idea because it made it too difficult to locate and isolate individual records. In a census, the machine would process hundreds of thousands and even millions of individuals. The trouble was that if, for example, you wanted statistics regarding Chinamen, you would have to run miles of paper to count a few Chinamen, Hollerith explained. So he went with a different idea. Each person would be represented by a separate punch card. The inspiration came from an observation he made on a train. To prevent people from passing around and reusing train tickets, conductors punched out a passenger's description on a little slip of paper: height, type of hairstyle, color, eye color, and nose type. It was an elegant and powerful solution. Each person had their own card, and each card had a standardized pattern of holes that corresponded to information collected by the census takers. Each card would encode a person's attributes: age, sex, religion, occupation, place of birth, marital status, criminal history. Once a clerk transferred the data from a census form onto a punch card, the cards would be fed into a machine that could count and arrange them in all sorts of ways. It could provide aggregate totals for each category or find and isolate groups of people in specific categories. Any trait, nationality, employment status, disability could be signaled out and sorted quickly. Hollerith described his system as making a punch photograph of each person, and indeed it did. A first-generation digital dossier of people and their lives. Used to count the census of 1890, Hollerith's tabulators were a huge success, cutting the time it took to crunch the numbers from years to months. The machines also lent census trackers the ability to slice, dice, and mine the data in ways that had never been possible. For example, to find a particular person or group of people, say Americans with at least one Japanese parent in California, or all orphans living in New York with a felony. This kind of fine-grained analysis on a mass scale was unprecedented. Overnight, Hollerith's tabulators transformed census taking from a simple count into something very different, something that approached an early form of mass surveillance. Newton Dexter North, a wool industry lobbyist chosen to head the 1900 census, was astounded by the ability of Hollerith's tabulators to so precisely tabulate racial data. Like many upper-class Americans of his day, North worried that the massive influx of immigrants from Europe was destroying the fabric of American society, causing social and political unrest, and threatening the nation's racial purity. This fear of immigration would become intertwined with anti-communist hysteria, leading to repression of workers in labor unions across the country. North saw statisticians like himself as technocratic soldiers, America's last line of defense against a foreign corrupting influence, and he saw the tabulator machine as their most powerful weapon. Quote, this immigration is profoundly affecting our civilization, our institutions, our habits, and our ideals. It has transplanted here alien tongues, alien religions, and alien theories of government. It has been a powerful influence in the rapid disappearance of the puritanical outlook upon life, North warned. But he heaped praise on Hollerith's newfangled computation device. I cannot detain the reader with a statement of the correlation of the data of individual elements of the population in combination with other data beyond the reach of hand tabulation which this invention opened up, he explained. Without it, we would never hope to lay bare all the truth we must have if we are to cope successfully with the problems growing out of the heterogeneous commingling of races which our defective immigration laws are forcing upon us. Two decades after this debut, Hollerith tabulation technology was absorbed into IBM. Improved and refined over the years, the machines became a runaway hit with businesses and government. They were used extensively by the U.S. military during World War II to keep an up-to-date tally of troop numbers, and were even dragged on shore during the invasion of Normandy. They were also used to process the internment of Japanese Americans during the war, and after President Franklin Delano Roosevelt created the social society system, IBM and its tabulators functioned as a de facto privatized arm that did all the processing and accounting for America's pension system. Perhaps most infamously, IBM's tabulator machines were employed by Nazi Germany. See, I said that. Perhaps most infamously, IBM's tabulator machines were employed by Nazi Germany to run death labor camps and to institute a system of racial surveillance by enabling the regime to comb genealogical data to root out people with traces of Jewish blood. There's a big-ass book about this. Let's see if that's the source. Go to footnote 50. A pioneering study explains the role that statistics and early computer technology played in the Holocaust. Quote, it was the use of raw numbers, punch cards, statistical expertise, and identification cards that made it all possible. Every military and labor column existed first as a column of numbers. Every act of extermination was preceded by an act of registration. Selection on paper ended with selection on the ramps. This is by Gotz, Ali, and Karl-Heinz Roth. The Nazi Census, Identification and Control in the Third Reich. No, that's a different source than the one that I was looking for. I thought it was going to be a different book. This is really interesting. The Nazi Census. I didn't know about this. I'm going to do IBM and the Holocaust really quick just to see if that brings up the book I'm thinking of. Yeah. So the book I was thinking of is this one right here. IBM and the Holocaust by Edwin Black. And that's a big book too. But no, the Nazi Census, Identification and Control in the Third Reich is another book. Let's see. This first one was published when? 2012. Okay, so IBM and the Holocaust published in 2012. The Nazi Census published in 2017. So anybody who really wants to dive down that deep end, I highly recommend checking those out. Let me know what you find. Whoa, Mark said, I wrote my first computer program on Hollerith punch cards and an IBM 360, my second on a first-gen IBM PC. Never became a programmer. That's crazy. Good to know. Willie Heidinger head of IBM operations in Germany and devout member of the Nazi Party, knew the part he played with the help of IBM tabulators in studying a sick German people and helping Adolf Hitler provide the cure. Quote, "We are very much like the physician in that we dissect cell by cell the German cultural body. We report every individual characteristic on a little card," he said in a fiery speech dedicating a new IBM factory in Berlin. "We are proud that we may assist in such a task that provides our nation's physician with the material he needs for his examinations. Our physician can then determine whether the calculated value are in harmony with the health of our people. It also means that if such is not the case, our physician can take corrective procedures to correct the sick circumstances. Heil to our German people and der Führer." So, yeah. Nazi Germany's use of IBM's technology is an extreme example, but it underscores the connection between the development of early computer technology and the study of management of large groups of people. IBM tabulators remained in operation through the 1980s. Indeed, until J.C.R. Licklider and ARPA developed interactive computing systems, tabulators and punch cards were the principal means by which militaries, government agencies, and corporations wrote programs and worked with complex data sets.
Amazing.
Yeah, guys. Amazing. Now, the connection to our current situation, outside of the fact that we do seem to be stuck in some kind of a feedback loop where everything everybody says, down to their diagnoses and their programs for solutions, as well as all slogans and messaging, internal and external, within any organizations that you could possibly organize change in today. Like, besides the fact that it all seems so cybernetic and necessarily co-opted and embedded in the very thing that it's trying to fight, and therefore constantly self-undermining. Outside of all of that, think about how memes are a sort of biological reductivist way of thinking about meaning. That, you know, it comes from an evolutionary biologist, Richard Dawkins, and gets taken up by the internet. Like, obviously we love memes, but there's this way of talking about memes where we think of mimetic warfare. And people think about the Overton window, and people think about statements of belief and statements of affirmation of identity, and think about how these things are politics, about how this is everything. And everything hinges on this, and they hinge their movements on this, right? It's about legibility. It's not just in the interests of capitalism trying to understand us, the population, by using big data so that it can appeal to our desire, which is itself mimetic. No, it's not just that. It's also about counterinsurgency. It's about getting out ahead of and undermining and siphoning away any political unrest, co-opting it into nothing but looting, co-opting it into nothing but protest, co-opting it into nothing but voting, co-opting it into nothing but a reading group where you sit around and interpret history and think that you are an actual extension of something from 100 to 200 years ago, like the material conditions did not change, like you're not having these reading groups in the actual lobby of the CIA or the Pentagon, like you are living in a time in a country and conditions like Lenin where you could just walk into the Winter Palace and take it over. Like nothing's changed. Completely unaware that, yeah, this is the playpen created by what we're talking about right here. And they don't just have your punch card, your genetic punch card. They don't just have that. They have your mimetic punch card at the level of your stated beliefs and at the level of your desire. And we are being gaslit about empirical reality and common sense every fucking day. And every reaction that the populace has, and the ways it moves around certain memes. Oh, you have to believe this and you better not believe this. And if you believe that, then you're a conspiracy theorist. And if you believe that, then you're a transphobe. And if you believe that, then you're a communist. And if you believe that, then you're a this. It's all a part of meme science, of big data science, of cybernetic control society. It is all happening in and because of this very thing that I'm communicating to you through, the internet itself, which was developed. Why? For what reason? We already know. It's called counterinsurgency, guys. This is why I say that people who are out here advocating for revolution or trying to keep the dream of Stalin alive or what have you, they're either feds or they're naive. And I'm over even taking them seriously. Like, I mean, this series is one that I've been wanting to do for a long time while I've been doing for a couple of years before I started Theory Underground. But now that I'm finally doing it, it's just like, yeah, it's high time to get through some of this stuff in the context of the courses and the streams that we've done up until this point. Because I've associated at this point with so many people who want to act like it's 1905. Like nothing's seriously changed in the last few decades. Like all of this cybernetic control society stuff has not reached some new degree that brings with it qualitative change in the actual conditions themselves. Like when Marshall McLuhan says that the medium has inverted base and superstructure, and Baudrillard takes that to heart. I don't know that Baudrillard goes far enough. Like, we don't even know what it means to take this to heart. But it'll be the stuff of history books someday. There is no doubt that Lick Leader's computer research at ARPA was intimately bound to the agency's expanding counterinsurgency mission. But in the internal discussions of his ARPA contractors, engineers, and social scientists at major universities across the country, Lick sought to de-emphasize the military applications in his command and control project, instead shifting the focus to the need to build productivity-boosting computer technology for his civilian contractors and their colleagues. In a letter to his contractors, Lick wrote, "The fact is, as I see it, that the military greatly needs solutions to many or most of the problems that will arise if we tried to make good use of the facilities that are coming into existence. I am hoping that there will be in our individual efforts enough evident advantage in cooperative programming and operation to lead us to solve the problems and thus to bring into being the technology that the military needs. When problems arise clearly in the military context and seem not to appear in the research context, then ARPA can take steps to handle them on an ad hoc basis. As I say, however, hopefully many of the problems will be essentially the same and essentially as important in the research context as in the military context." On a fundamental level, the computer technology required to power active military operations was no different from the tech scientists and researchers used in their work. Collaboration, real-time collection, and sharing of data, predictive modeling, image analysis, natural language processing, intuitive controls and displays, and computer graphics. If the tools developed by ARPA contractors worked for them and their academic buddies, they would also work for the military with only slight modifications. Today's military takes this for granted. Computer technology is always dual use, to be used in both commercial and military applications. De-emphasizing ARPA's military purpose had the benefit of boosting morale among computer scientists who were more eager to work on the technology if they believed it wasn't going to be used to bomb people. The text that I plan on bringing into this series eventually on this kind of research has so much, and just example after example after example of how researchers never know what is funding their research focus, right? But like, you can't just research what you want when it comes to science. You got to find funding for it. And the funding is always for something specific. And if it's, something infrared related, they don't sell it to you as like it's military funded. Instead, the military funding apparatus has several sort of institutes and nonprofits that it uses to sort of be like red herrings, I guess would be a way of saying that. So that if someone does try to look into the funding, they'll just find some nonprofit doing good work. Who could ever have a problem with that? And then they go ahead and they do the research, and then this is exactly what they're helping. Scientists are almost always incredibly naive when it comes to political realities. In fact, I don't know, I'd be fascinated to know of a scientist who's not incredibly naive when it comes to political things. I love how so many people are into this guy, Jacques Fresco, with the Venus Project. And he tries so hard to be like this scientist, but then he does political theory. And it's just so dumb if you don't know basic political philosophy and theory and the history of ideas. But he doesn't think he needs to know that because he's not a humanities guy. He's an engineer of the future. 2 years into his job at ARPA, Lick began to view the various computing projects he had seeded all over the country, from UCLA to Stanford and MIT, as parts of a larger connected unit. Computer thinking centers that at some point in the near future would be netted together into a single unified distributed computing machine. It mirrored the vision of a networked society he had outlined in 1960. First, you connect the powerful computers via a high bandwidth network. Then you connect users to these computers with telephone lines, satellite dishes, or radio signals, whichever technology was best suited to their particular needs. It would not matter whether people logged in from home, work, a jeep crawling through the jungles of Vietnam, or a stealth bomber flying 10 miles above the Soviet Union. Quote, in such a system, the speed of the computers would be balanced, and the cost of the gigantic memories and the sophisticated programs would be divided by the number of users, he had written. In 1963, 4 years after publishing that paper, Lick began coyly referring to this idea as the Great Intergalactic Network. Fundamentally, his vision for a distributed interactive computing network is not very different from what the internet looks like today. The word made flesh in real time. That's what this is. In 1964, 2 years after coming to ARPA, Lick decided that he had fulfilled his mission of getting the agency's command and control research program up and running. He moved his family to Westchester County, New York, to start a cushy gig running a research division at IBM. Younger and more energetic men would have to finish the job he started. New section, the Arpanet. Lawrence Roberts was 29 years old when he reported to duty at ARPA's Command and Control Research Division inside the Pentagon. The year was 1966, and he was hired for a big and important job to make Lick's Great Intergalactic Network a reality. Everything was in place. ARPA had a range of functional overlapping interactive computer projects spread across the country, including at the following centers. There's a whole list here, so I'm going to read it off. MIT's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, MIT's Project Mac, Stanford's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, Stanford's Research Institute, Carnegie Mellon University, University of California, Irvine, UC Los Angeles, UC Berkeley, UC Santa Barbara, Rand Corporation, Utah University. It was time to wire all these computer centers together and have them function as one unit. It would be called the Arpanet. Roberts came from the MIT Lincoln Laboratory, where he had been working on graphics and computer communication systems. Some of his colleagues found the strict atmosphere there stifling. In fact, 2 of them left in a huff because the lab's no pets policy. They wanted to bring a cat into the lab. Lincoln would not allow them to bring a cat in, and they decided that was unfair. They would go somewhere where cats were tolerated, he recalled, noting wryly that the cats were not for companionship, but for gruesome experimentation. Quote, it was really a fight over having the connection with the brain electrodes and all of that. Lincoln just did not want anything to do with it. Oh my God. At first I was going to be like, these are my these are my guys right here, these ones, because they're like, oh, my cat's not welcome, I'm not coming in. But now we find out the dark truth. They just wanted these cats to experiment on. Horrible. But Roberts had no such problem. He had a broad forehead, big floppy earlobes, and a stern but calm and measured way of talking. He was a math and theory kind of guy. He thrived in Lincoln Lab, working on moonshot algorithms, image compression, and data network design. He knew Lick was inspired by his vision of a universal network that could net all sorts of systems together. Indeed, Roberts was an efficient networker. Within a few weeks, he had the place, one of the world's largest, most labyrinthine buildings, memorized. Getting around the building was complicated by the fact that certain hallways were blocked off as classified areas. Roberts obtained a stopwatch and began timing various routes to his frequent destinations, writes Katie Hafner and Matthew Leon in their upbeat and zany book about the creation of the internet, Where Wizards Stay Up Late. Oh, that sounds like a fun one. Inside the Pentagon, people started calling the most efficient path between 2 points Larry's route. I admit to being kind of Larry-ish in this sense. I'm always like doing this when I drive places, but that comes from my time being a pizza delivery driver back before GPS was normal. Roberts liked building networks, just not the social kind. He was reserved and extremely socially averse. None of his coworkers, not even the ones closest to him, knew much about him or anything about his personal life. He was obsessed with efficiency and was really into speed reading, studying, and improving his technique to the point where he could read 30,000 words a minute. Yeah, well, I'd like him to explain Kant to me. I fucking hate speed readers, man. They're so stupid. I've never met an intelligent speed reader. Most people I know spent the last 15 years dicking off because they think that they're speed readers, and then they fucking can't focus on anything longer than a Substack without doing meth. I'm not even joking, guys. He was obsessed with efficiency and was really into speed reading, studying, and improving his technique to the point where he could read 30,000 words a minute. Quote, he'd pick up a paperback and be through with it in 10 minutes. It was typical Larry, one of his friends recalled. Robert's task was daunting. Connect all of ARPA's far-flung interactive computer projects with computers made by a half dozen different companies, including a one-of-a-kind Iliac supercomputer, into one network. Almost every conceivable item of computer hardware and software will be in the network. This is the greatest challenge of the system, as well as its greatest ultimate value, said Roberts. Not long after arriving at ARPA, he convened a series of meetings with a core group of contractors and several outside advisors to hash out the design. The sessions brought together a mix of ideas and people. One of the most important was Paul Barron, who had worked at RAND designing communication systems for the Air Force that could survive a nuclear attack. Over time, the group came up with a design. Key to the network would be what Roberts called interface message processors, or IMPs. These were dedicated computers that would form the connective tissue of the distributed network. Connected by telephone lines leased from AT&T, they would send and receive data, check for errors, and ensure the data successfully reached the destination. If part of the network went down, the IMPs would attempt to retransmit the information using a different pathway. IMPs were the generic gateways to ARPA's network, functioning independently of the computers that used them. Different makes and models of computers did not need to be designed to understand each other. All they needed to do was communicate with the IMPs. In a way, IMPs were the first internet routers. Finally, in July 1968, Roberts put out a contract request to over 100 computer companies and military contractors. Bids came back from some of the biggest names in the business. Both IBM and Raytheon were interested, but the contract was ultimately awarded to an influential early computer research firm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, called Bolt, Benerick, and Newman, where J.C.R. Licklider was a senior executive. The very first Arpanet node, powered by the IMPs, went live on October 29th, 1969, linking Stanford to UCLA. The first attempt to connect barely worked and dropped after a few seconds. But by the next month, connections to UC Santa Barbara and University of Utah were also made. 6 months later, 7 more nodes became operational. By the end of 1971, more than 15 nodes existed, and the network kept growing. In October 1972, a full demonstration of the Arpanet was carried out at the first International Conference on Computer Communications in Washington, D.C. It astounded people. ARPA contractors fit out a hall with dozens of computer terminals that could access computers across the country and even a link to Paris. Software available for demonstration included an air traffic simulation program, weather and meteorological models, chess programs, database systems, and even a robotic psychiatrist program called ELIZA that could provide mock counseling. Engineers ran around like children at an amusement park, overwhelmed by how all the different parts flawlessly fit together and worked as one interactive machine. Quote, "It was difficult for many experienced professionals at that time to accept the fact that a collection of computers, wide hand circuits, and many computer switching nodes, pieces of equipment totaling well over 100, could all function together reliably, but the Arpanet demonstration lasted for 3 days and clearly displayed its reliable operation in public," Roberts recalled. The network provided ultra-reliable service to thousands of attendees during the entire length of the conference. Even so, not everyone was excited by what ARPA was doing. Holy shit, we've got 49 likes over here. That's crazy. That's crazy. This is not supposed to be so popular, everybody. But thank you so much for dropping in. Thank you for giving it a like. Thank you for your interest and for helping us out. This is kind of the home run, the home stretch. This chapter did not go as deep into cybernetics as the science of control, which is what it actually means, science of control, which is obviously why Deleuze writes the postscript on societies of control later, right? Because we've moved beyond the disciplinary society into a control society where everything is about modulating the population, not as a population of individuals, but as a population of memes, really. And this is all essential to understanding the world that we're in. Finishing out this chapter, it's going to feel really good because I've been wanting to get through this for a long time. And I'm so excited for all of you all to think about this stuff. And my favorite kind of reflections are the ones that come after a few months when someone has thought about something and maybe at first they didn't think about it. It didn't really click in some kind of a deep way. And, you know, they were kind of like, oh, yeah, they entertained it. Maybe it passed through one ear and, you know, out the other. But it's after the thought comes back and then you're, what was that? And then you revisit it and then you do a little bit of your own digging. And those kinds of reflections are the ones that I'm mining this human population for. I am doing everything I can to filter out from our audience, from the Theory Underground audience, people with short attention spans who aren't trying to correct for that situation. People who lean into it and make excuses for it and say, oh, I'm autistic and ADHD and I have to do Adderall, but I can't follow with anything longer than a Substack. And guys, fucking welcome to the 21st century. You've described the problem. Now, what's your solution? What are you trying practically? Are you going to put on your big boy pants yet and get serious? Or are you just going to keep fucking off on the internet? I'm trying to filter out from the audience those kinds of people and select for those who are looking to switch into a more serious mode. And so it's so good to see that there are those kinds of people coming out of the woodwork and filling up the courses, filling up the seminars, the ongoing research seminars at Theory Underground, and that we have at this point over 40 monthly subscribers. That's not like, $1 patrons over at Patreon or whatever. These are people who are mostly spending $30 to $75 a month because they care about the ongoing research. They care about the lectures that Ann and I are doing. They care about the lectures that Mikey and I are doing. They care about the lectures that Benjamin Studebaker is also doing for Theory Underground, which I'm going to premiere a lecture from actually here at the end of this. So at the end of my reading of this, I'm going to dump you all into the premiere of a Benjamin Studebaker lecture that he gave us all on Sunday, which is a crash course on basically the syllabus for Cambridge's political philosophy program, for specifically ancient philosophy, ancient political philosophy, Plato and Aristotle and stuff like that, all the way up to John Locke. And then parts 2 and 3, modern and contemporary political theory, those will come later in this month and the beginning of next month. It's fantastic to have Studebaker helping out with us all in that way. The octoputer serves the ruling class. September 26, 1969 was a mild fall day at Harvard University, but all was not well. Several hundred angry students gathered on campus and marched on the office of Harvard's dean. They piled inside and refused to leave. A day earlier, 500 students had marched through campus, and a small contingent of activists from Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, had broken into the school's Office of International Affairs and forced the administrators out onto the street. Similar troubles were afoot just across the river at MIT, where students were holding protests and teach-ins. Flyers posted on both campuses railed against computerized people manipulation and the blatant prostitution of social science for the aims of the war machine. One leaflet warned, "Until the military social science complex is eliminated, social scientists will aid the enslavement rather than the liberation of mankind." What exactly were the students protesting? The Arpanet. Vietnam is the most blatant example of the U.S. attempt to control underdeveloped countries for its own strategic and economic interests. This global policy that prevents the economic and social developments of the Third World is imperialism. In serving these policies, the U.S. government has no qualms about setting up a project that ties together MIT, Harvard, Lincoln Labs, and the entire Cambridge research and development complex. Earlier that year, activists from Students for a Democratic Society got their hands on a confidential ARPA proposal written by none other than J.C.R. Licklider. The document ran to almost 100 pages and outlined the creation of a joint Harvard-MIT ARPA program that would directly aid the agency's counterinsurgency mission. It was called the Cambridge Project. Once complete, it would allow any intelligence analyst or military planner connected to the Arpanet to upload dossiers, financial transactions, opinions, surveys, welfare rolls, criminal record histories, and any other kind of data, and to analyze them in all sorts of sophisticated ways, sifting through reams of information to generate predictive models, mapping out social relationships, and running simulations that could predict human behavior. The project emphasized providing analysts with the power to study third world countries and left-wing movements. Studies saw Cambridge Project and the bigger Arpanet that plugged into it as a weapon. A pamphlet handed out at the MIT protest explained, "The whole computer setup and the ARPA computer network will enable the government for the first time to consult relevant survey data rapidly enough to be used in policy decisions. The net result of this will be to make Washington's international policemen more effective in suppressing popular movements around the world. The so-called basic research of the so-called basic research to be supported by Project CAM will deal with questions like why do peasant movements or student groups become revolutionary? The results of this research will similarly be used to suppress progressive movements." And that's kind of been where the left's brain stopped. It kind of stopped thinking at that level of, oh, we'll be suppressed. It didn't think in the sense of, oh, everything we've ever said and done will be co-opted into serving these predictive models and driving on the very counter or opposites of what it is that we are countering, right? Yo, Anne's here, tuning in from Amazon. Good to see you. She says, greetings from Amazon. Had to pause for a bit, but I'm back. Weird Solowski's here. What's up? Good to see you. Said, fun to hear while cleaning the house. Great to have you. Great to have you both. I'll have to go pick up Anne from work, and then we're going camping. I can't wait. The Cambridge Project, also known as Project CAM, was born out of an idea composed in 1968 by Licklider and his longtime colleague Ithiel Dusolapul, an MIT political science professor and expert in propaganda and psychological operations. As head of ARPA's Command and Control Research Project and Behavioral Sciences Program, Lick had seen how the agency struggled with the mountains of data generated by its counterinsurgency initiatives in Southeast Asia. Hey, if you're just chilling by the chat, say hello. Say, like, do an @Ann and say, hi, Ann. I almost feel like I need to teach you all some basic etiquette. But, you know, it's like, I think it's like theory people don't want to be like live chat people, but at the same time, you still end up finding yourself in live chats and then not knowing how to do it. But like, if a person says greetings, say hi to them. I'm just saying. A major goal of his work during his brief stint at ARPA was to jumpstart a program that would ultimately build the underlying systems that could make computer-aided counterinsurgency and command and control more efficient. Tools that ingest and analyze data, create searchable databases, build predictive models, and allow people to share that information across vast distances. Poole was driven by the same passion. Thank you for saying hi to Anne. Like, guys, the algorithm's not a joke. This is the medium. This is the only way this is going to work. People will not see this stuff if we don't do the thing that we're supposed to do when using it. If I was to sit here and read in silence, it just wouldn't work. I have to kind of perform, and there's a way to like also perform. I know most of you don't have the time and you're multitasking. Most of you have wet hands because you're washing dishes or working at a Amazon warehouse like Ann is. But hey, try to like, you know, mix it up, because for the next 2 months, I'm going to keep doing these. It's going to be an awesome series. Unless, of course, they just keep fizzling out. And this chat, if it was going a little bit more steadily over the last 2 hours, like last time, I think we would have seen the viewership not taper away. Because what happens is everyone comes in on average for only 7 minutes. That's the average. 12 minutes, 7 minutes to 12 minutes is the average. And of course, a lot of people then go back later, but it's like this rotating door policy. People are just kind of checking it out, getting the vibe, and then they go. But then new people don't come in if the people who are coming through don't engage. Okay, so it's like by the time you find out about it, you found out about it because somebody else engaged with it. But then if you come through and you don't pay it forward, then the algorithm just goes, oh, okay, I won't show it to someone then. Also, I'm just surprised that this gets any algorithm traction at all, considering the fact that I've been talking about the CIA this whole time. And considering the fact that I'm not like one of these creators who sits around and says, like, they edit out the word Nazi, you know what I mean? Or they edit out all cuss words. We just call those Walmart creators. I don't know if anybody remembers, but if you bought albums from Walmart back in the day, they would have the words censored out, like the bad words. That's where most of YouTube's at right now. It's pretty funny. Starting in the late 1950s, he ran MIT's Center. This is Poole. Poole ran MIT's Center for International Studies, a prestigious Department for Communication Studies that was founded by the CIA and helped set MIT's Department of Political Science. He was a hardcore anti-communist and a pioneer in the use of opinion polling and computer modeling for political campaigns. With his expertise, he was tapped to guide the messaging of John F. Kennedy's 1960 presidential bid, crunching poll numbers and running simulations on issues and voter groups. Poole's data-driven approach to political campaigning was on the cutting edge of a new wave of electrical technologies that sought to win by pre-testing people's preferences and biases and then calibrating a candidate's message to fit them. These new targeted messaging tactics, enabled by rudimentary computers, had a lot of fans in Washington and, over the next several decades, would come to dominate the way politics were done. They also inspired fear that America's political system was being taken over by manipulative technocrats who cared more about the marketing and selling of ideas than they did about what those ideas actually meant. Poole was much more than a campaign pollster. He was also an expert in propaganda and psychological operations and had close ties to ARPA's counterinsurgency efforts in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Soviet Union. From 1961 through 1968, his company, the Symbiosis Corporation, worked on ARPA counterinsurgency programs in South Vietnam as part of William Godel's Project Agile, including a major contract to study and analyze the motivation of captured Vietnamese rebels and to develop strategies to win the allegiance of South Vietnamese peasants. Poole's work in Vietnam helped further the idea that a purely technical solution could stop the insurgency. Symbiosis relied heavily on the work of Poole's MIT colleague, Lucien Pai, who had argued since the early 1950s that communism was a psychological disease of transitioning peoples. In his influential Politics, Personality, and Nation Building, he explained that psychological failures lay at the root of stalled nation-building efforts, writes historian Joy Rold in The Last Stand of Psychocultural Cold Warriors. To win the war for hearts and minds, Americans needed to design a psychologically appropriate political infrastructure for the emerging nation, a structure through which peasants would develop the appropriate psychological ties to the state. Military research would write the protocol for a kind of national therapy. At the same time, symbiosis contractors gathered data in Vietnam's sweltering jungles. Poole's company worked on another ARPA initiative called Project ComCom, short for Communist Communications. Run out of Poole's home base at MIT, ComCom was an ambitious attempt to build a computer simulation of the internal communications system of the Soviet Union. The objective was to study the effects that foreign news and radio broadcasts were having on Soviet society, as well as to model and predict the kind of reaction a particular broadcast, say a presidential speech or a breaking news program, would have on the Soviet Union. So, when was this? Exactly? When was the year? So, like, is this the 60s or the 70s? 68. Poole's doing his thing in 68. The point is, you release a kind of news and then you study the psychological impacts and reactions of certain types of people. That is more valuable to the cybernetic counterinsurgency machine god than a bunch of people towing the line. Okay. If your reaction to seeing something, let's just use, for instance, 9/11, the Twin Towers falling. If your reaction is a certain way, well, that's noteworthy in the sense of understanding the average reactions of people, but also for understanding how people who are not so average might react. If they have your punch card, metaphorically speaking, in terms of your genetic and mimetic makeup, and they are using predictive models, and then seeing what you actually do to then go, oh yeah, well that falls in line with this prediction as opposed to that other prediction. Oh, it didn't meet any of our predictions. Okay, recalibrate, constantly recalibrating, fucking millions of times per second. People think they can like somehow evade the machine while they're on the internet. They think, oh, well, because I'm saying that I want to, end capitalist society or counter imperialism, or that I'm a this, that, or the other, or that I really believe this one. You think that somehow changes things? You think that somehow doesn't mean that everything that you can say or think hasn't already been run through this a million times? You think that this stuff isn't hand-me-down slogans from 70 years ago, back when they were developing this stuff in the first place? At the same time, it's such a stupid word, simulmatics contractors gathered data in Vietnam's sweltering jungles. Poole's company worked on another ARPA initiative called Project ComCom, short for Communist Communications. Run out of Poole's home base at MIT, ComCom was an ambitious attempt to build a computer simulation of the internal communication system of the Soviet Union. I know some of this is a repeat, but the objective was to study the effects that foreign news and radio broadcasts were having on Soviet society, as well as to model and predict the kind of reaction a particular broadcast, remember this is what I was just talking about, the kind of reaction a particular broadcast, say a presidential speech or a breaking news program, would have on the Soviet Union. Unsurprisingly, Poole's models showed that covert CIA attempts to influence the Soviet Union by beaming radio propaganda were having a big effect, and that these efforts needed to be stepped up. Quote, most of the things of a positive character that are happening in the Soviet Union today are explainable only in terms of the influence of the West, for which the most important single channel is radio, Poole said in a speech explaining the results of the ComCom study. In the long run, those who are talking to the Soviet Union are not talking to deaf ears. Their voices will be heard and will make a great deal of difference. But Poole was never satisfied with ComCom's performance. Even in the late 1960s, the crude state of computer technology meant that it took several months for him and his team to build a model for just one situation. It was painstaking work that clearly required more powerful computer model tools that simply did not exist. I wonder if any of this ever discourages militia types, asks Weird Solowski. I've never met a militia type who wasn't at least somewhat tuned into this kind of thing, but usually militia types are also aware that military and intelligence organs of the government are themselves fractured along all kinds of lines. And because they're usually not very careful about going down these paths of thought, and they don't really do critical thinking or theory in any sort of rigorous or systematic or philosophically based way. They often just go off into conspiracy Looney Tunes land, and that's why they become like these QAnon types of people, right? Like, I don't know. I live in Idaho. I've met plenty of militia people. Does this discourage them? No, I think they often just think, well, it's just the liberals. The liberals are the ones that are, but there's good guys in there. There's good guys in there, and they don't understand how everything they're doing is co-opted by all of it. Poole saw computers as more than just apparatuses that could speed up social research. His work was infused with a utopian belief in the power of cybernetic systems to manage societies. He was among a group of Cold War technocrats who envisioned computer technology and networked systems deployed in a way that directly intervened in people's lives, creating a kind of safety net that spanned the world and helped run societies in a harmonious manner, managing strife and conflict out of existence. This system wouldn't be messy or wishy-washy or open to interpretation, nor would it involve socialist economic theories. In fact, it wouldn't involve politics at all. but would be an applied science based on math, a kind of engineering. Yeah, that is the bedrock. It is, of course, like in a sort of sense, apolitical in the sense that, yes, we are at the end of history, not for the reasons that Fukuyama thought, but in the way that all competing historical trajectories have been collapsed into this sort of self-defeating cybernetic feedback loop. This wanting to help run societies in a harmonious manner, managing strife and conflict out of existence. I'm just gonna throw this out there, but like I'm pretty sure that has always been the goal of the PMC from before the time that college became the main sort of pathway that was kind of put on the radar of every person going through the schooling system. Back before everybody was being groomed to become professionals or managers or otherwise to see themselves as undeserving, lowly workers. The goal, going all the way back to Taylor in the Principles of Scientific Management, was to create harmony in society, which is always about getting out ahead of and rendering impossible any serious working class organizing, which at this point has been accomplished. People think that like an Amazon warehouse being able to develop a union somehow changes things. And the hope salesman will always use that or this win in France or what have you to say, see, we're not irrelevant. We're doing something for real. Oh, except they didn't see how that had a ripple effect and created the opposite effect everywhere else or whatever. You know, like they're not able to think how these things causally work. And ultimately, how could we? We don't have the intelligence or personnel that these institutions have been refining now for the last 70 to 80 years. In 1964, at the same time his company was doing counterinsurgency work for ARPA in Vietnam, Poole became a vocal supporter of Project Camelot, a different counterinsurgency effort funded by the U.S. Army and backed in part by ARPA. Camelot was just a code name. The project's full official title was Methods for Predicting and Influencing Social Change and Internal War Potential. Its ultimate goal to build a radar system for left-wing revolutions, a computerized early warning system that could predict and prevent political movements before they ever got off the ground. I think that like this is where the liberal, including Yasha Levine, I suspect, but the liberal brain kind of just stops. It's not able to think the next step, which is that helping them get off the ground and do so speedily, but having that be run by and or capitulating to specifically students of certain sort of dispositions is a good way to actually undermine the thing. Have it get overrun by naive people going through a particularly rebellious phase that are going to quickly burn out. Have it go through that way and make sure that it never actually reaches parents. Make sure that any movement becomes unserious to most parents as quickly as possible. You know, like these kinds of things are obvious, like, but only to me, apparently. I don't know. One of the project's anticipated end products was an automated information collection and handling system into which social researchers could feed facts for quick analysis. Essentially, the computer system would check up-to-date intelligence information against a list of participants and preconditions, writes historian Joy Road. Revolution could be stopped before its initiators even knew they were headed down the path to political violence. Yep. Well, in just the same way, certain kinds of political violence could be fostered because pseudo-activity creates the opposite. We've been doing this in the background with our seminars, but like pseudo-activity spurs on mass passivity and is the word dulcidity? Whatever. What's the word I'm looking for? Whatever. Passivity is good enough. That's a good enough word. Pseudo-activity drives passivity. Project Camelot was a big undertaking that involved dozens of leading American academics. It was very dear to Poole personally, but it never got very far. Chilean academics who were invited to participate in Project Camelot blew the whistle on its military intelligence ties and accused the United States of trying to build a computer-assisted coup machine. The affair blew up into a huge scandal. A special session of the Chilean Senate was convened to investigate the allegations, and politicians denounced the initiative as a plan of Yankee espionage. With all this international attention and negative publicity, Project Camelot was shut down in 1965. In 1968, Lick's Cambridge project at MIT picked up where Camelot left off. To Lick, the Cambridge project was the realization of the initiative or of the interactive computer technology he had been pushing for. Finally, after nearly a decade, computing technology had advanced to a point where it could help the military use data to fight insurgencies. The Cambridge project included several components. It ran a common operating system and a suite of standard programs custom-tailored to the military's behavioral science mission that could be accessed from any computer with an Arpanet connection. It was a kind of stripped-down 1960s version of Palantir, the powerful data mining, surveillance, and prediction software the military and intelligence planners use today. The project also funded various efforts to use these programs in ways that were beneficial to the military, including compiling various intelligence databases. I kind of read that like it was going to continue, but that was the end of that sentence. So, yo, what's up? We got a bunch of new people in here. Great to see you all. So this is nearing the end, and then I'm going to raid you all in the audience right now. If you stay in this audience, then you will land, once this stream is over, in the lobby of the premiere of the, I guess it's part 1 of a survey of political philosophy with Benjamin Studebaker. It's never been released to the internet before. This is a very exciting lecture that he gave just a couple of days ago. And so I'm stoked to share this with you all. Shit, is it Monday or Tuesday? It was yesterday. He gave this lecture literally yesterday, and it's going to be released to you today. And so, yeah, it's absolutely essential that we understand our situation, and part of understanding is getting critical distance on it, and part of getting critical distance is suspending a lot of our presuppositions and also understanding how our social unconscious is historical, is political, is economic, is entrenched in various tendencies that have been programmed repeatedly, on repeat, experimented with, through trial and error by these intelligence apparatuses and the university matrices that work with them. And what we're actually getting at here is just part of it, but also part of it is just doing the actual history of ideas, political philosophy itself, from Plato and Aristotle through Machiavelli and Marx to our contemporary day. You have to do the whole thing. And I know people feel the need, if they want to be a democratic citizen, to like keep up with the Joneses, to keep up with the Minority Report or the Majority Report, to watch Sam Cedar and to keep up with the bread tubers. And ultimately, most of you are here because you burnt out on that. Most of you are here because you feel like it's all just going nowhere. Most of you are here because you're looking for something more. This kind of a history is not usually something that people in the world of theory dive into. This kind of a book just isn't really on the radar of most people doing critical theory. We have to do it. We have to do it all. We have to do philosophy of science. We have to do political philosophy and theory. We have to do these kinds of deep dives into the origins of the actual material conditions of the medium that we all presuppose and that organize and orchestrates our lives, the medium that we ultimately live through, which is the internet. Great to have you all here. I'll keep reading. As a bonus, the Cambridge project served as a training ground for a new cadre of data scientists and military planners who learned to be proficient in data mining on it. The Cambridge project had another less menacing side. Financial analysts, psychologists, sociologists, CIA agents, the Cambridge Project was useful to anyone interested in working with large and complex data sets. The technology was universal and dual use. So on one level, the goal of the Cambridge Project was generic. Still, the project was customized to the military's needs, with particular focus on fighting insurgencies and rolling back communism. A big part of the proposal list submitted to ARPA in 1968 focused on the various types of data banks the Cambridge Project would compile and make available to military analysts and behavioral scientists connected through the Arpanet. Public opinion polls from all countries, cultural patterns of all the tribes and peoples of the world, archives on comparative communism, files on the contemporary world communist movements, political participation of various countries. This included such variables as voting, membership in associations, activity of political parties, etc. Youth movements, mass unrest and political movements under conditions of rapid social change, data on national integration, particularly in plural societies, the integration of ethnic, racial, and religious minorities, the merging or splitting of present political units, international propaganda outputs, peasant attitudes and behavior, international armament expenditures, and trends. It was clear that the Cambridge Project wasn't just a tool for research, it was counterinsurgency technology. Majority Report intro contains the Eisenhower military-industrial complex quote. Yeah, I know. I'm just not convinced that there's anything progressives and liberals who are electoral politics wonks are capable of doing or thinking that isn't fully embedded in the thing. And most people who watch it know that, but they get their jouissance from watching it. And they either rationalize their drive to do it, or they're doing it because drive is irrational anyway, and they just do it because they know it feels good in a weird sort of stressful way. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, huge anti-war protests erupted on university campuses across the country. Activists occupied buildings, stole documents, published newsletters, staged sit-ins and marches, clashed with police, and became increasingly violent. I love how he keeps going back to this sort of... This is like the fourth time that Yasha Levine, is the author of this, has basically described this kind of thing. It's like he keeps retelling the same part of the story, because you can tell that a lot of the people who read this kind of thing, they feel so alive when they think about activists in this period doing sit-ins and teach-ins. Oh yeah. It's like there is something deep in the libido that forms the habitus of your average sort of leftist. And it's very like their ideal ego is very much like, I'm doing the sit-in, man. At the University of Michigan, students attempted to block campus recruitment by Dow Chemical, which produced the napalm that rained down on Vietnam. Someone blew up the Army Mathematics Research Center at the University of Wisconsin. The Weather Underground set off a bomb inside Harvard Center for International Affairs. They wanted to stop the Vietnam War. They also wanted to halt the co-optation of academic research by the military-industrial complex. ARPA programs were a constant target. Students protested against the ILIAC 4, the massive ARPA supercomputer housed at the University of Illinois. They targeted the Stanford Research Institute, an important ARPA contractor involved in everything from chemical weapons research to counterinsurgency work and development of the Arpanet. Students occupied the building shouting, "Get SRI out," and "Down with SRI." A few brave contractors stayed behind to protect ARPA's computers from the angry mob, telling protesters that computers were politically neutral. But were they? The student demonstrations against the Cambridge Project were part of this wave of protests sweeping the country. The common belief among students at MIT and Harvard was that the Cambridge Project and the bigger ARPA network it was tied to was essentially a front for the CIA. Even some professors began turning on it. The language of Lick leaders' proposal, talk about propaganda and monitoring political movements, was so direct and so obvious that it could not be ignored. It confirmed students' and activists' fears about computers and computer networks and gave them a glimpse into how military planners wanted to use these technologies as tools for surveillance and social control. A crew of activists from Students for a Democratic Society produced a small but informative booklet that laid out the group's opposition to the initiative. It was called the Cambridge Project, the Social Science for Social Control. It sold for $0.25. The cover featured a series of punch cards being fed into a computer and transformed black militancy, student protest, strikes, and welfare struggles into counterinsurgency, ghetto pacification, and strike breaking. See, I just see this all as so naive on the SDS's part. Like, do they not see how these things hold each other together in a sort of, it's dialectical, like how these two things feed each other, how black militancy feeds ghetto pacification and vice versa, how student protest feeds and sustains the sort of pacification that we have on campuses. How welfare struggles and I just, to me, it's just like, it feels very obvious, but At one point, the pamphlet's producers gathered on Technology Square at the edge of the MIT campus. They obtained a copy of Lick's Cambridge Project proposal and set fire to it. Lick, over-enthusiastic and confident in his ability to sway people to his way of thinking, met the protesting students outside and attempted to reassure them that everything was okay, that this Arpanet project wasn't some nefarious initiative cooked up by spies and generals. But students would have none of it. The group was hostile, Dow Yetema, the director of the Cambridge Project, told M. Waldrop. But he, Lick leader, was pretty cool about it. At one point, in fact, they had a copy of the proposal and tried to set fire to it, not very successfully. Well, after a few minutes, Lick said, "Look, if you want to burn a stack of paper, don't just try to light it. Spread the pages out first." So he showed them how, and it really did burn much better. That kind of goes along with what I'm saying, which is like, they'll show you how to set fire to buildings if you can't figure it out. They'll even open the front door to the Capitol. But the students gathered there had a deep understanding of the political and economic dimensions of ARPA's military research, and they were not going to be dismissed like petulant school children. They persisted. Lick tried to be a good sport about it, but he was disappointed. Not in the project. No, he was down on the kids. He believed the protesters did not understand the project and completely misread its intentions and military ties. Why wouldn't young people understand that this technology was completely neutral? Why did they have to politicize everything? Why did they think America was always the enemy and would use technology for political control? He saw the whole thing as a symptom of the degradation of American youth culture. The demonstrations against the Cambridge Project involved hundreds of people. They were ultimately a part of the larger anti-war movement at MIT and Harvard that attracted the leading lights of the anti-war movement, including Howard Zinn. Noam Chomsky showed up to lambast academics, accusing them of running cover for violent imperialism by investing it with the aura of science. But in the end, the protests didn't have much of an effect. The Cambridge Project proceeded as planned. The only change, further proposals and internal discussions for funding omitted overt references to military applications and the study of communism in third world societies, and project contractors simply referred to what they were doing as behavioral science. Yeah, now they just put a rainbow on it and everything is okay. Evan says, "I have no libido for that as a leftist. These days, sit-ins and direct action just make me suspicious. People are making noise while doing nothing real." I mean, I know that depends, but yeah, I mean, hey, look, if you're a leftist and you're still around at Theory Underground, then you're obviously not implicated by that statement. And let's be fair, I'm talking about like NPR liberal progressives and people who basically have the exact same big other, but just, want to push them left because they have this very one-dimensional idea of the field. Behind the scenes, the military and intelligence dimension of the project remained foremost. Indeed, a classified guide from 1973 commissioned by ARPA for the Central Intelligence Agency noted that although the Cambridge project was still experimental, it was nonetheless one of the most flexible tools available for complex data and statistical analysis in existence, and recommended that the CIA's international security analysts learn how to use it. The Cambridge project ran for a total of 5 years. As time would prove, the kids were right to fear it. And by fearing it, they put them on high alert that they better be less forthright. Or at least that's what we are to believe. I mean, when it comes to counterinsurgency, people who are well-trained in psychological operations, you probably shouldn't believe anything that they say. Like, for instance, the fact that they think that it's neutral and that the kids, they just don't get it. And the whole thing, I don't trust any of it. But it's fascinating stuff. It's very fascinating. And so I'm glad you all made it to some of this today, whether you saw the whole thing or not. We kept it under 3 hours, which is great. Chapter 2 of Surveillance Valley by Yash Levine is now complete. I'm about to go camping. And I guess all I'll say before I take off is thank you. It really means the world to have so many of you subscribing at Theory Underground, or also the patrons who make the public stuff possible. Thank you so much. I'm about to play the PSA that was really only up to date in the beginning of June. A lot has changed since then. The subscription model is much better. For instance, every level of it gets 90% off of my lecture courses and 50% off of all visiting instructors at Theory Underground, as well as access to a ton of courses on the back end, like somebody who's signed up just today because they wanted access to the Intro to Land course that Mikey is teaching. Yep, just become a monthly member. That's the best way to be able to access that kind of thing. And if you stick around, you'll be the first person ever to see this overview of ancient political philosophy by Benjamin Studebaker. So we're going to move from this sort of like recent military American kind of history to like this deeper kind of political philosophy approach. If you just stick around, you'll be transferred into that premiere. See you all in a few days.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run a review of books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Time Energy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, you know, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried, and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy, and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, you know what, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward. With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added tier 0 and tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico.
What's up, everybody? TUCon 2024 update here. It's not happening in Mexico anymore, but it is still happening on October 24th through the 27th.
The change was made because a lot of the people that wanted to attend and that were expected to attend said they could probably afford to travel if they had more time advance notice. So save up for June 2025.
If you have to choose, right? Because this one that is happening this year is happening physically in Boise, Idaho, because we have a lot of collaborators and fellow travelers and co-instructors there. But you can attend virtually for this one. You won't be able to attend virtually next year. So yeah, if you have to choose, attend physically in 2025. The call for proposals already happened. The writing workshop for proposals already happened. You can still get the links to both of those. Just shoot us a message and ask for those links. We'll get you those. And the form goes live on June 1st, and the deadline is June 15th. So if you're attending physically, let me know ASAP.
Get in on it.
All right. Finally, last little thing here is to say thank you so much to my patrons over at Patreon. The Patreon is for people who are too busy to be students or subscribers at Theory Underground, but who want to see more of this free content on the podcast and YouTube channel for Theory Underground. You are the ones who see something of value in the free content being made available here, and you want to see more of it. Your patron pledges at Patreon are a real motivator for me. So thank you so much, especially to Marilyn Lawrence, Bert Vanderkar, Carl Vanderlip, Nikolai, Sakil, Zoxandra, Darian, Max, Al, Alagiri, Ben, as well as several others including Core Atlantic, Louis or Louise, Matt Payne, Neil, Simon, and Yiz.